Hey there, story lovers. This is N.O. Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Gringotts' blood test at age 7 revealed 89 stolen lordships and declared Dumbledore enemy of magic? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, What the Blood Knows. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Arabella Figg had been expecting the usual post, a catalogue from Madame Pimpernel's and a note from her sister in Aberdeen. So when the ministry-sealed envelope tumbled out from between a coupon flyer and her gas bill, she nearly missed it entirely. Nearly. But 40 years of living adjacent to the wizarding world had given her reflexes that had nothing to do with magic, and her hand shot out and caught it before it hit the linoleum. Harry James Potter, care of number 4, Privet Drive. Except it hadn't gone to number 4. It had come here, to her door, which meant either the owl had made a spectacular error, or something had redirected it. Arabella stood in her kitchen in her dressing gown, cats weaving between her ankles, and turned the envelope over in her hands. The seal was the ministry's standard purple wax, but underneath it, barely visible, like a watermark, was a second impression. A scales. Gringotts. She made herself a cup of tea. She sat down. She thought about it for a very long time. Then she put on her shoes and walked next door. The Dursleys were the kind of people who kept their curtains drawn against the world, which Arabella had always found both paranoid and entirely justified given what she knew about them. She rang the bell at 8 in the morning and listened to the shuffling and muttering from inside until Vernon Dursley opened the door in his bathrobe, face already arranged into an expression of profound irritation. "Mrs. Figg," he said, not warmly. "Mr. Dursley." She smiled at him with all the warmth of a woman who had been watching this family for 7 years and had opinions. "I need to speak with Harry. He's not available. He's 7 years old and it's summer, so unless you've enrolled him in something you neglected to mention to his welfare officer." She watched his face go through 3 colors in quick succession. "I imagine he's quite available." There was a long pause. Then Vernon stepped back from the door with the energy of a man who was calculating odds and not liking the results. Harry was in the kitchen. He was standing at the stove making breakfast, proper breakfast, eggs and toast and bacon, and he was doing it with the focused competence of someone who'd been doing it for years, which at 7 years old, Arabella thought, was one of the most quietly heartbreaking things she'd ever seen. He turned when she came in, and his green eyes, Lily's eyes, God, always Lily's eyes, went from her face to the envelope in her hands, and something sharpened in his expression that had no business being in the face of a child his age. "That has my name on it," he said. "It does. Is it bad?" Arabella looked at this small, too thin boy with his overlarge shirt and his careful eyes, and she said, "I don't know yet. I think it might be very important." "Those are different things," Harry said, and turned off the stove, and looked at her with an expression that said he'd already learned that important things were usually bad things, and he was ready for it anyway. She let him read the letter. Or rather, she let him try. The first half was standard ministry registration language, dense and circular, but the second half was a Gringotts formal notice, and even she had trouble parsing it. What she could understand was this: Harry Potter was being invited. The word summoned was crossed out and replaced with invited in someone's handwriting, to Gringotts Bank for a routine inheritance assessment. The letter had a date. The date was 3 days ago. "We missed it," Harry said. "It came to my house instead of yours," Arabella said. "Which is interesting. Why would it come to your house?" "That," said Arabella, "is an excellent question." She watched him think about it. She watched him reach the same place she had, or somewhere close to it, the understanding that letters did not simply end up in wrong places, that things in the wizarding world that looked like accidents were rarely accidents, and that someone had wanted this letter not to reach him. And she watched him decide, quietly and completely, that he was going anyway. "I'll need to change," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "You will." Gringotts Bank in the early morning had a quality that the tourist afternoon crowd never saw. The great bronze doors were being polished by a goblin who didn't look up as they entered. The marble floors caught the low golden light from the chandeliers and threw it back in warm geometric patterns. There were perhaps a dozen people conducting business at the various windows, all of them in the hushed, purposeful mode of people who took their finances seriously, and behind the long counter, goblin after goblin worked with the silent efficiency of creatures who regarded human money as both a profound responsibility and a personal insult to be carefully managed. Harry walked in and looked at all of it with the air of someone taking inventory. Arabella had dressed carefully, her best robes, her good hat, because if she was walking into a goblin bank to demand they conduct an inheritance test on a child who'd missed his appointment, she was going to look like she had every right to do so. She approached the nearest free window with her chin up and her letter in hand. "We're here regarding Harry Potter's inheritance assessment," she said. The letter was misdirected and he didn't receive it in time for the original appointment. "I'd like to reschedule." The goblin behind the counter had a face like weathered bark and eyes like polished jet. He looked at her. He looked at Harry. Something moved in his expression, not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it. "One moment," he said, and disappeared. Harry had moved to stand beside her, and she noticed he was looking at everything with that same inventory expression, the ceiling, the vaults, the other goblins, the doors leading deeper into the bank. Not anxious. Assessing. "It's very gold," he said quietly. "Goblins value craftsmanship," Arabella said. "And they value their agreements above almost anything else. If you're polite and direct with them, they'll respect you for it. What if I'm not polite? Then be direct enough that politeness becomes irrelevant." He considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. "Okay." The goblin returned. He was not alone. The goblin beside him was older, considerably, visibly older, with silver at his temples and a bearing that Arabella recognized immediately as the particular posture of someone who is accustomed to being the most important person in any room and is not interested in pretending otherwise. He was wearing the deep charcoal robes of a bank director. "Ragnarok," Arabella said, surprised. "Mrs. Figg." His voice was low and precise, like a blade being set on a table. "I was informed that Mr. Potter had come in person." His black eyes moved to Harry with an attention that was not polite or performative but utterly focused. "I wanted to see for myself." Harry looked back at him without any of the flinching or shuffling that most adults expected from 7-year-olds. "Why?" Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Then, and Arabella would replay this moment for years afterward, he said, "Because what is in your file is not something I should have discovered this morning. It is something I should have discovered years ago, and the fact that I did not is a source of considerable personal dissatisfaction." He paused. "Come with me." The room they were taken to was not one of the standard assessment offices. It was deeper in the bank, through 2 sets of warded doors that opened to Ragnarok's hand and required Arabella to sign a confidentiality contract that made her fingers tingle, and then they were in a room with stone walls and a single long table and the kind of silence that felt like it had weight. 3 other goblins were already present, all of them older, all of them with the same tight, intent focus as Ragnarok. "What is this?" Arabella asked. "A proper assessment." Ragnarok gestured for Harry to sit. "Not the cursory review that is standard for minor inheritances. A full-blood inheritance rite." He set a small stone basin on the table, ancient, carved with runes Arabella couldn't read, and a silver knife no longer than her finger. "Mr. Potter, I need to explain what this involves before you consent." "You need 3 drops of blood," Harry said. Ragnarok stopped. "How do you know that?" "I read a lot," Harry said simply. "You put the blood in the basin and the magic reads what's in it. Bloodline, inheritances, titles, any active spells or blocks on the person." He paused. "Is that right?" "Essentially." Ragnarok's expression had shifted into something that Arabella couldn't quite categorize. "You are 7. Nearly 8. Most adults don't know the mechanics of a full inheritance rite." Harry shrugged with one shoulder. "Most adults don't spend a lot of time in libraries because there's nowhere else to go. Something passed between the goblin elders at that, not words, just a quick exchange of glances, and then Ragnock placed the knife on the table in front of Harry and said, "The rite requires your willing participation and full understanding. Once the blood meets the basin, the magic will reveal everything. Not just what you own. Everything." "I understand," Harry said. "You might not like what it shows." Harry picked up the knife. His hand was steady. "Then I'll deal with what it shows." He made the cut, clean, quick, utterly calm, and pressed 3 drops into the basin. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the runes on the basin began to glow. The parchment that rolled out from beneath the basin was longer than it had any right to be. It kept coming, inch by inch, the silver and gold script appearing as fast as the magic could write it, and Arabella watched Ragnock's face as he read it in real time, and she watched the expressions that moved across that ancient, controlled face, and she understood, before she read a single word, that what was being revealed was not just significant. It was catastrophic. The Potter line alone was complex, more than she'd known, titles and properties and vault contents that spoke to a family far older and more powerful than the blood traitor narrative had suggested. But that wasn't what was making Ragnock's jaw tighten. It was the second column. The third. The long, rolling list of additional inheritances, names she half recognized, names she didn't know at all, that had been legally transferred, at some point in the past, to one Harry James Potter, only to then be marked with a symbol she needed one of the younger goblins to translate for her. Intercepted. Funds diverted. Access blocked by external party. 89 times. She read the number twice to make sure she had it right. 89 separate lordships, 89 family lines, 89 sets of titles and vaults and properties and political seats in the Wisengamot, all of them flowing to Harry by the ancient rules of magical inheritance, extinct lines, last of kin transfers, blood adoptions made generations ago, and all of them blocked. Not lost. Not transferred to someone else. Blocked. The magic of the inheritances was still there, still pointing at Harry like a compass needle at north, and something, someone, had put up a wall between him and everything that was rightfully his. Who authorized the blocks? Arabella heard herself ask. Ragnock didn't answer immediately. He was reading something near the bottom of the parchment, and his stillness was the particular stillness of someone who is choosing, very carefully, what to do with what they've just learned. Then he looked up, and his eyes were not directed at Arabella. They were directed at the parchment itself, at the very bottom, where the quill was still writing in slow, burning letters, and the letters it was writing were not silver or gold. They were red. Enemy of magic. Enemy of blood. Designated by ancient rite, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. The parchment wrote the name and then the quill stopped, and the room was so quiet that Arabella could hear her own heartbeat, and Harry was leaning forward in his chair reading the name with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Not shock. Not fear. Something colder than either. What does enemy of magic mean? He asked. It is the oldest designation in wizarding law, Ragnock said. His voice had gone very flat and very careful, the way a surgeon's hands go careful around something vital. It predates the ministry. It predates the Wisengamot. It means that this individual has acted, deliberately and repeatedly, against the foundational magical rights of another person. Not through ignorance. Not through circumstance. He paused. Through intent. Harry looked at the name again. He knew. The rite does not accuse the falsely accused, Ragnock said. The magic doesn't have politics. It has only truth. He knew, Harry said again, as though testing the weight of it, fitting it into some framework he was building quietly and privately, and then he sat back in his chair and looked at Ragnock with eyes that were very old for his face. What can I do about it? The question was so direct that one of the elder goblins actually made a sound, not quite a laugh, something more like recognition. Ragnock set his hands on the table. More than anyone has attempted in 400 years, he said. They were in that room for 3 hours. Arabella drank tea that appeared from nowhere and tried to keep up with the speed at which Ragnar and his colleagues moved through the parchment, cataloging, cross-referencing, building a picture of what had been done and how. She also kept watching Harry, who was following every word with an attention that should have been impossible in a 7-year-old and was clearly, stubbornly, refusing to be impossible. The picture that emerged was this: at some point in the first year of Harry's life, possibly before his birth, possibly in the immediate aftermath of his parents' deaths, the magical inheritance routes that should have activated automatically on the deaths of James and Lily Potter had been intercepted. Not crudely. Not by brute force. By someone who understood the ancient inheritance laws well enough to slip a series of quiet, technically legal redirections into the system. Each one alone looked like an administrative adjustment. Together they formed something that Ragnar kept calling, with increasing precision, a deliberate and systematic theft. The 89 Lordships were the headline. But they were not the whole story. There was the matter of Harry's magical core. The blood test had found 3 blocks on it, layered spells designed to limit magical expression, placed with a precision that spoke to extraordinary skill. They weren't the crude suppressors used on accidental magic in Muggle areas. They were architectural. Someone had gone into the structure of Harry's core the way a builder goes into a house, and quietly lowered the ceilings and narrowed the doors and made sure that whatever lived inside would always feel just a little smaller than it was meant to be. When Ragnar explained this, one of the elder goblins, Griphook the Elder, who had said almost nothing for 2 hours, produced a long silver instrument that looked like a tuning fork and held it near Harry's shoulder, and the instrument rang. Just once. A single clear note that started in one register and then climbed, and climbed, and kept climbing until Arabella felt it in her back teeth. Merlin's bleeding, the younger goblin behind her breathed. Language, Ragnar said, without looking away from Harry. What does that mean? Harry asked, looking at the tuning fork. It means, said Ragnar carefully, that whoever put those blocks on your core was not limiting a minor magical talent. He set the instrument down. They were containing something considerably more significant. Harry looked at his own hands for a moment. Then he looked up. Can you remove them? Yes, Ragnar said. But not today. The removal of 3 layered core suppressors requires preparation, specific ritual space, and goblin healers present in case of reaction. He said the last word with the diplomatic delicacy of a man who means catastrophic magical discharge and would prefer not to alarm the child. When? Harry said. 3 days. All right. Harry folded his hands on the table. What else? There was also the matter of Sirius Black. It came up almost as a footnote, a legal notation on the parchment that Arabella very nearly missed, but Harry caught it, because Harry was reading every word with that same terrible attention, and his finger landed on it before she even found the line. Designated Magical Guardian, Sirius Orion Black, currently incarcerated, Azkaban Prison, Cell Block 7. He's in Azkaban? Harry said. Yes, Ragnar said. He's supposed to be my guardian. He is your guardian. Legally. The designation was never changed because changing it would have required acknowledging that it existed, and acknowledging that it existed would have created legal complications for the arrangement made by, Ragnar paused, and his voice went flat again, Albus Dumbledore, who placed you with the Dursley family without any legal authority to do so. The room was quiet. Was there a trial? Harry asked. For Sirius Black. The quiet got heavier. No, Ragnar said. Arabella watched Harry sit with that for a moment. She watched him add it to whatever structure he was building, fit it in alongside everything else, and she watched his expression settle into something she recognized with a pang of pure sadness, the look of a child who has just learned that the adults responsible for the world he lives in are not, as a rule, trustworthy, and has decided to take appropriate action. I want him out, Harry said. That will take time, Ragnar began. I'm not asking you to do it today. I'm asking you to start. Harry looked at him. He's my guardian and he wasn't given a trial. That's wrong. Is that legal? No, Ragnarok said. It is not. Then we start there. Harry looked at the parchment again, at the long, rolling list of everything stolen from him, at Dumbledore's name burning at the bottom, and something in his face was completely, utterly decided. And I want copies of all of this. All of it. The inheritances, the blocks, the guardian designation, Dumbledore's name at the bottom. Everything. Copies will be made and sealed in Gringotts' vault for your protection, Ragnarok said. I want my own copies too. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, with the air of a man revising an estimate upward. Your own copies will be provided. They were preparing to leave, Arabella gathering her bag, Harry folding his copies of the parchment with the careful precision of someone who has learned not to lose important things, when Ragnarok spoke again. Mr. Potter. He waited until Harry looked at him. I owe you an apology. Harry went still. This bank held your accounts. This bank administered your family's vaults. And this bank, through negligence, or through the deliberate obstruction of our own records, which we are investigating as of this morning, failed to identify what was being done to your inheritance for 6 years. Ragnarok's voice was level, but there was something underneath it that was not level at all. Gringotts does not fail its clients. When it does not make excuses. I am sorry. Harry looked at him for a long moment. Are you going to fix it? To the full extent of our considerable ability, Ragnarok said, and the words had the quality of an oath. Then that's enough, Harry said. He shook Ragnarok's hand, and Arabella saw, in the half-second of that contact, Ragnarok's expression shift in a way she'd never seen on a goblin's face before. Something that might have been surprise. Something that might have been, buried very deep beneath centuries of professional remove, something close to respect. They walked out through the warded doors, through the long marble hall, past the polishing goblin and the bronze doors, and out into Diagon Alley where the summer morning was warm and the crowd was beginning to fill the cobblestones with color. More actions. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, Lords don't ask permission. The 3 days before the ritual were the longest of Arabella's life and apparently the busiest of Harry's. She'd expected him to go quiet, to go home and sit with what he'd learned the way children sometimes did, retreating into the shock of it. Instead he came to her house each morning with a list. Actual lists, written in his cramped, too neat handwriting on whatever paper he could find, because the Dursleys didn't provide notebooks any more than they provided anything else. On the first morning the list had 7 items. On the second it had 14. By the third morning it covered both sides of a page torn from a Tesco receipt roll and she needed her reading glasses to parse it. You've been busy, she said, setting the kettle on. I've been thinking, Harry said, sitting at her kitchen table with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea she'd made him. He drank tea like a very small old man, both hands, no milk. Can I ask you something? Yes. How long have you known? About me. About what I am. Arabella sat down. She'd been dreading this question in the abstract for years, and now that it was here, sitting across from her in an overlarge t-shirt with a fading Batman logo, it was somehow both worse and easier than she'd imagined. Since before you were born, she said. Your parents were friends of mine. Your mother especially. Did you know about the inheritances? The Lordships? No. I knew your family was old and powerful. I didn't know the extent of it. Did you know about Dumbledore? The kettle began to whistle and she got up to pour it, mostly to have something to do with her hands. I knew he'd placed you with the Dursleys. I was told it was necessary. Protection. The blood wards. She set his fresh cup in front of him. I accepted it because the person telling me was someone I trusted, and because it was easier than the alternative. Which was? Believing that Albus Dumbledore was capable of doing something monstrous. Harry wrapped his hands around the new cup and looked at the steam coming off it. Is he dangerous? If he finds out what we found? Yes, Arabella said, and decided that honesty was the only thing she had left to offer him. Harry nodded once, absorbing this the way he absorbed everything, not with drama, just with that quiet, architectural attention, fitting it into the structure. "Then we need to move fast," he said, and turned his list back over. The ritual room was deeper in Gringotts than they'd been before, accessed through a passage that required blood from both Harry and Ragnock to open, which Harry submitted to with the same calm he'd shown the first time. The room itself was carved from raw stone, the floor covered in chalk runes that 3 goblin healers had been laying since before dawn. It smelled of minerals and old magic, the way very old places do when the magic in them has been there so long it's become part of the stone. There were 6 goblin healers in total. Ragnock stood at the edge of the runed circle and gave Harry a briefing that was admirably precise and entirely unsettling. "When the blocks are removed, your core will expand rapidly to its natural state," he said. "This will be uncomfortable." "How uncomfortable?" "Extremely." "Right. There is a possibility of involuntary magical discharge. The healers will contain it. You will not be in danger. However, the room may not survive entirely intact." Harry looked around at the stone walls and the ancient runes. "This room looks like it survived a lot." "It has," Ragnock said. "We chose it for that reason." Harry stepped into the circle, and the chalk runes flared gold under his feet, and he stood in the middle of it all, small, underfed, wearing clean second-hand clothes that Arabella had sourced from a charity shop the day before because she'd refused to let him go through this in Dudley's cast-offs, and he looked at the assembled goblin healers with his calm green eyes and said, "Let's get it done." The eldest healer, a woman named Gryffra, made a sound that was the goblin equivalent of a laugh. She met Ragnock's eyes across the circle and something passed between them. Then she began. The first block came off with a sound like a harp string snapping, a sharp, clear note that Arabella felt in her sternum from where she stood at the observation alcove outside the circle. Harry's shoulders went rigid. His jaw tightened. He said nothing. The second was worse. The sound was lower, more resonant, and the chalk runes nearest Harry's feet flared white-hot and 2 of the healers moved in quick, practiced response, their hands tracing counter-runes in the air. Harry made a noise through his teeth that was clearly not the scream he was refusing to produce, and his hands curled into fists at his sides, and the air around him shimmered the way air does above hot tarmac in summer. "Mr. Potter," Gryffra said calmly, "do not suppress the response. Let it move through you." "I'm fine," Harry said, through his teeth. "You are, in fact, catastrophically fine," she said. "That's the problem. Let it move." The third block came away like a dam breaking. The sound wasn't a note. It was a concussion. Arabella stumbled backward into the stone wall and felt the entire room shake, and the chalk runes didn't flare, they ignited, every line of every rune burning gold and white simultaneously, and the healers moved with the focused urgency of people who had prepared for exactly this and were still surprised by the scale of it. Harry was at the center of it all, and the light was coming from him, not from outside, not from the runes, from him, pouring outward in waves, and it took 3 full seconds for it to crest and ebb and settle. When the light cleared, Harry was standing in the middle of a circle of scorched stone. The chalk runes were gone, burned away. 2 of the stone walls had new cracks in them. The ceiling had a scorch mark directly overhead. Harry looked up at the scorch mark. He looked at his hands. He looked at Gryffra. That, he said, in a voice that was entirely level, was uncomfortable. Gryffra stared at him for a moment. Then she turned to Ragnock and said something in gobbledygook that Arabella didn't speak, but whose tone she recognized perfectly well. "I have never seen anything like that in my life." It took Harry about 4 hours to get used to himself again. That was how he described it afterward, sitting in Ragnock's office with a plate of food that the bank had produced and that Harry was working through with the focused efficiency of someone who has spent years eating quickly before it gets taken away. "It's like walking into a room where all the furniture has been moved," he said. "Everything's the same room but I keep reaching for things in the wrong place." "That will normalize," Ragnock said. Within a week, most likely. Good. Harry picked up a piece of bread. I want to talk about the legal strategy. Ragnarok, who had been director of Gringotts for 63 years and had conducted financial negotiations with everyone from minor ministry bureaucrats to the governor of the International Confederation of Wizards, permitted himself one brief moment of private amusement and then schooled his face back to professional attention. Go ahead. The inheritances first, Harry said. The blocked ones. How do we start reclaiming them? The process is primarily legal and financial. For each title and vault, we file a formal reclamation with the relevant registration body, the Wisengamot Registry for titles, the Ministry's Department of Magical Records for properties, along with the blood test results as evidence. How long does each one take? Individually, weeks to months. The registry clerks are not known for speed. What if we file all 89 at once? Ragnarok considered this. The registry would be obligated to process them. There is no mechanism by which they could simply ignore 89 simultaneous reclamation filings supported by a Gringotts blood inheritance right. He paused. It would cause significant disruption. Good, Harry said. It would also attract attention. I know. Harry met his eyes. That's fine. Ragnarok looked at him steadily. Dumbledore will hear about it. Yes, Harry said. He will. And then, with the complete absence of drama that was becoming his signature, that's also fine. Arabella set down her own tea. She'd been sitting to the side, mostly listening, and she'd been doing the quiet math on what she was watching. A 7-year-old boy, 8 in 3 weeks, she reminded herself, who had spent his entire conscious life being made small, had discovered in the space of 72 hours that he was, legally, politically, and apparently magically, one of the most significant figures in the British wizarding world. And instead of being overwhelmed by it, he was approaching it the way he'd approached making breakfast that first morning. With focus. With efficiency. With the bone-deep competence of someone who has never once been able to afford to fall apart. She thought about Lily Evans, who had been one of the most quietly formidable people Arabella had ever known. She thought, of course. They filed on a Thursday. Ragnarok's legal team, 7 goblins and 2 wizarding solicitors who had worked with Gringotts for decades and who had signed so many confidentiality wards that morning they were practically vibrating with suppressed legal outrage on Harry's behalf, submitted 89 simultaneous reclamation filings to the Wisengamot Registry at precisely 9 in the morning. They submitted the documentation on Sirius Black's wrongful imprisonment to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement at 9:01. They submitted a formal notification to the Department of Magical Records regarding the illegal guardianship arrangement at 9:02. At 9:03, according to the solicitor who'd been watching from the lobby of the Ministry building, a junior registry clerk came out of the filing room, looked at the pile of documents that had just arrived, and sat down on the floor. Ragnarok reported this to Harry with the controlled satisfaction of a man watching a well-executed plan land exactly as predicted. Harry was eating an apple. What happens next? Harry asked. The registry is legally required to acknowledge receipt within 24 hours. The acknowledgement must go to the claimant. Ragnarok folded his hands on his desk. In this case, the claimant is you. The ministry will know who filed. They will know the basis of the claim. They will have 24 hours before they are legally obligated to respond. And in those 24 hours, they will panic, Ragnarok said, with quiet relish. They also sent a copy of the complete blood test results, every page, Dumbledore's name burning at the bottom in red, to 3 separate recipients simultaneously, the senior partner of Blackwood and Associates, the wizarding world's most prestigious independent legal firm, Augusta Longbottom, who held 2 Wisengamot seats and was well known for her opinion on Albus Dumbledore, which was not positive, and a sealed personal copy to a journalist named Barnabas Cuff at the Daily Prophet, with strict instructions that it was not for publication but for verification purposes, and a note in Harry's own handwriting that said simply, "Hold on to this. You'll need it later." Arabella had raised an eyebrow at that one. "You're thinking long-term." Dumbledore has a lot of friends, Harry said. We're going to need to make more. The ministry response came in 18 hours rather than 24, which Ragnarok said indicated either unusual administrative efficiency or abject panic, and that given the ministry's known operational tempo, the latter was far more probable. It came in the form of two things: a formal receipt acknowledgement signed by a mid-level Wisengamot administrator named Griselda Marchbanks, who was, Arabella knew, one of the more genuinely principled members of the institution, and a separate, unofficial note, delivered by Private Owl and not through any ministry channel, that simply said, "We need to talk. I will come to you." GM Augusta Longbottom's response was faster and significantly more direct. It came as a full call to Arabella's fireplace at 6 in the evening, and Augusta Longbottom's face in the flames was the face of a woman who has been waiting, for a very long time, for a specific kind of news and has just received it. "Is he there?" Augusta said, without preamble. "He is," Arabella said. "Put him in front of me." Harry came and crouched in front of the fireplace and looked at Augusta Longbottom's face in the green flames, and Augusta looked at him, and then she said, "You look exactly like your father except for the eyes." "So I'm told," Harry said. "I knew James Potter. I knew Lily Potter. I knew what was done to your family, young man, and I have been unable to do a single thing about it for 6 years because to act on what I knew without evidence would have destroyed my ability to act at all." She paused. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "You were waiting for someone with the standing to move first," Harry said. Augusta's eyes sharpened. "Yes. And now I have it. Now you have 89 lordships worth of it," she said, "which is more than enough. I will be at Gringotts tomorrow morning. There are things I need to tell you in person and things I need to show you that I have been holding in safekeeping." She paused again, and something moved in her face that was less the legal strategist and more the woman. "Your parents were good people, Harry. They were taken from you by evil, and then you were taken from everything they meant for you to have by something that dressed itself as good. I intend to help you take it all back." Harry looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you," he said, and Arabella noticed, because she was watching carefully, that his voice was steady, and his face was steady, and only his hands, briefly, were not. Augusta Longbottom arrived at Gringotts the next morning wearing battle robes and her most aggressive hat and accompanied by her 7-year-old grandson, who had apparently refused to be left behind and whom she had apparently decided not to fight on this one. Neville Longbottom was round-faced and serious, and he looked at Harry with the expression of someone who has heard a great deal about a person and is now conducting a rapid assessment of whether the reality matches the expectation. "Nan says you're reclaiming 89 lordships," Neville said. "Yes," said Harry. "That's brilliant," Neville said, simply and completely, and Harry looked slightly surprised, the way people do when they're expecting complicated reactions and get a simple one, and then he nodded and something in his shoulder settled a fraction. "Thanks," Harry said. "Can I watch?" "The legal stuff, I mean. Nan says it's going to be historic." "Neville," Augusta said. "I'm just asking." "It's fine," Harry said. "You can watch." Neville's face went through a brief sequence of emotions that culminated in a grin that was approximately 70% of his entire face, and that was how Neville Longbottom came to sit in the back of Ragnarok's conference room while Augusta Longbottom laid out on the table a collection of documents she had been keeping in a sealed vault for 6 years. There were letters. Personal letters, some from James Potter and one from Lily, written in the months before their deaths, that spoke with the clarity of people who felt a shadow coming and were trying to prepare for it. There was a legal document, hand-drafted, witnessed by 3 people whose signatures Arabella recognized, and dated 3 weeks before the Potters died, that named Sirius Black as Harry's guardian and specifically, explicitly, stated that in the event of both parents' deaths, Harry was under no circumstances to be placed with Petunia Dursley. It stated the reasons plainly. She has rejected magic entirely. She has rejected her sister entirely. She would not love him. He must be loved. Lily's handwriting. Harry read that line and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he turned to the next page. There was also a Wisengamot brief, never submitted, that Augusta had drafted herself in the weeks after Sirius Black's arrest, arguing for a mandatory trial. It had been ready to file. And then a brief note, in handwriting that Ragnarok identified from other documents as belonging to the then-chief warlock of the Wizengamot. Augusta, this is not a path we should pursue at this time. Trust me. A.D. She'd kept it. For 6 years she'd kept it, because Augusta Longbottom understood, with the long experience of someone who had watched power operate for decades, that the day would come when she needed proof not just of what Dumbledore had done, but of the casual, confident ease with which he'd done it. The way he'd told her to step back as though it were the most reasonable thing in the world. As though Sirius Black's right to a trial were an inconvenience to be managed rather than a fundamental legal obligation. He knew Black was innocent, Augusta said. She said it flat and direct, looking at Harry. I cannot prove it. But I know it. He sent an innocent man to Azkaban and he left you with muggles who were legally prohibited from having you. And he slept, I have no doubt, absolutely soundly. Harry was very still for a moment. Then he said, what do we need to get Sirius out? Evidence that the arrest was made without trial, Augusta said. Which we have, because there is no record of a trial. A formal petition from someone with legal standing in the Wizengamot, which your lordships give you. A review by the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, which we trigger with the petition. And ideally, she paused, a signed statement from Peter Pettigrew. Pettigrew is dead, Arabella said. He killed himself to escape. He is presumed dead, Augusta said. There is a difference. His body was never recovered. What was recovered was a finger. One finger, Harry said. One finger, Augusta confirmed. Harry looked at Ragnarok. Is there a way to check? There are magical tracking methods applicable to individuals who are alive and magical, Ragnarok said carefully. They are expensive and require significant cooperation from, do them, Harry said. Harry, Arabella said, he let Sirius go to Azkaban for something he didn't do, Harry said, and his voice was calm, but it had a quality now, since the ritual, since the blocks had come off, that it hadn't had before. A resonance. As though the words had weight behind them that was physical as much as emotional. I'm not going to wait for the right moment to fix it. We start now and we push hard and we don't stop. He looked at Augusta. I want to go to the ministry. A brief silence. You're 7 years old, Augusta said. Nearly 8, Harry said. And I have 89 lordships, documentation of illegal guardianship, evidence of suppressed magical inheritance, and a Gringotts certified blood inheritance right naming a senior ministry figure as enemy of magic. He paused. How many adults need to go with me to make them take it seriously? Augusta looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was simultaneously deeply impressed and slightly alarmed. 2, she said. Myself and Ragnarok. Then let's go today, Harry said. The Ministry of Magic on a Friday afternoon had the specific atmosphere of an institution that was technically working but was spiritually already thinking about the weekend. The atrium was busy enough, robes in ministry purple weaving between the fountain and the lifts, the golden statues gleaming under the magical lights, but it had the slightly loose, slightly distracted energy of a Friday, and nobody in it was ready. They came through the visitor entrance, the phone box on the Muggle side, because Harry didn't have a wand yet and couldn't use the flu, but what the ministry security desk got instead of the usual mix of old appointments and shuffling visitors was Ragnarok, director of Gringotts, in formal charcoal robes, Augusta Longbottom, holder of 2 Wizengamot seats, in battle robes with the Longbottom crest, Arabella Figg, who had the specific calm of someone who has already been through several catastrophes this week and is managing nicely, and Harry Potter, who was wearing the cleanest and most impressive set of robes Arabella had been able to find at short notice, which were bottle green and fit him far better than anything he'd previously owned, and who was looking at the ministry atrium with clear green eyes and absolutely no expression of being impressed. The security wizard at the desk looked at them. He looked at Harry. He looked at the list. He looked back at Harry. Name? He said, slightly weakly. Harry James Potter, Harry said. Lord of Houses Potter, Peveril, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and 83 additional hereditary lordships currently in the process of formal reclamation. I have an appointment with the Wisengamot Registry and the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He paused. The appointment was made this morning. I believe they're expecting us. The security wizard looked at his list. He looked at Harry. He looked at Ragnarok, who looked back with the expression of a goblin who has all day and none of it to waste. Second floor, the security wizard said. Registry is room 17. DMLE is room 32. I'll send ahead. Please do, Harry said. They walked to the lifts, and Arabella noticed that the people they passed in the atrium had started to slow down, the way people do when they sense something significant happening, and a few of them were looking at Harry with the specific wide-eyed expression of people doing math in their heads and coming up with answers they weren't expecting. In the lift, going up, Neville, who had also refused to be left behind and whom Augusta had also, again, decided not to fight, stood next to Harry and said quietly, "You all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "Your hands aren't shaking or anything." "Should they be?" Neville considered. "Mine would be." Harry looked at him for a moment. "You came, though." "Yeah," Neville said, and shrugged with the particular ease of someone who is scared and present at the same time, which is its own kind of courage. The lift opened on the second floor. The head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement was a witch named Amelia Bones, and she was one of the few people in the Ministry building that day who was, it turned out, completely ready for them. She was also the only one who stood up when they came in, not from ceremony but from the instinct of someone who has been in enough situations to recognize when one is significant. She was broad-shouldered and monocled and had the look of a person for whom fair was not a courtesy but a professional standard, and she looked at Harry across the length of her office with an expression that went through several rapid revisions before settling on something that was honestly and straightforwardly furious. Not at Harry. Furious on his behalf, which was a different thing entirely. "Sit down," she said. "All of you. I've read the filing." She picked up the thick folder on her desk. "I've been reading it since 9 this morning, as a matter of fact, and I want you to know that what I am about to say is entirely unofficial and not for the record." She looked at Harry. "What was done to you is one of the most thorough and deliberate violations of magical law I have encountered in 30 years of doing this job. And the name at the bottom of that blood right document," she set it down, "is a name I am going to have to approach very, very carefully, because he has more allies in this building than I have." "More than I do," Harry said. Amelia Bones looked at him, this slight 7-year-old boy with his calm eyes and his bottle-green robes, and for a moment her expression was almost surprised. "No," she said, after a pause. "As of this morning's filings, considerably fewer than you." "Good." Harry folded his hands on the table in that way he had. "Then what do we do about Sirius Black first?" Amelia Bones opened her folder. "We start," she said, "by formally requesting the trial record." "There isn't one," Harry said. "No," she agreed. "There isn't. And when I submit that formal request, the absence will be officially documented. And when the absence is officially documented," she looked over her monocle at him, "someone is going to have to explain it." "Who authorized the arrest?" Augusta asked. "That," said Amelia, "is where it gets interesting." She pulled a single sheet from the folder and set it on the table. Sirius Black was arrested by Aurors following reports of an explosion in a Muggle street. 12 Muggles dead, Peter Pettigrew presumed dead. Black was found at the scene. The arresting Aurors filed their report. She tapped the sheet. The report goes to the sign-off officer, which at that time was the head of the DMLE. The head of the DMLE signs the detention order. She paused. The head of the DMLE at that time was Bartemius Crouch Sr. The room sat with that for a moment. "But," Amelia continued, between the detention order and what should have been an arraignment hearing, there is a 24-hour gap in the official record. And in that gap, Black was transferred directly to Azkaban. Not to a holding facility. Not to a preliminary hearing. Directly to Azkaban. She looked around the table. Transfers to Azkaban require sign-off from both the head of the DMLE and the chief warlock of the Wizengamot. Augusta's jaw went tight. Dumbledore. Both signatures are on the transfer order, Amelia said. Which is the only document in Sirius Black's entire file that is not, itself, procedurally problematic. Because they needed that one to be clean, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. They skipped the trial because a trial would have produced evidence and evidence would have been a problem, Harry said. But they still needed the transfer to look procedurally sound so no one could challenge it on administrative grounds. So they made sure that one document was right. He looked at Amelia. And it's the only one. So the whole case rests on a signed transfer that has no trial behind it. Amelia Bones looked at Harry Potter the way, Arabella thought, a teacher looks at a student who has just solved a problem that the teacher assumed would take until the end of term. Then she said, if you were 10 years older, Mr. Potter, would offer you a job. I'll take a rain check, Harry said. What do we file first? They left the ministry at 4 in the afternoon. The registry filings were formally acknowledged. The DMLE review of Sirius Black's case was officially open. 2 different ministry officials had found urgent reasons to be in the corridor outside Amelia Bones' office while they were inside it, and Arabella had no doubt that by Monday morning the news of what had been filed, and by whom, and how much, would have reached every corner of the building. Including, inevitably, one particular corner where an old man with half-moon spectacles sat behind a desk and managed the world with a gentle hand. Harry knew this. He'd known it since Tuesday morning in her kitchen. He'd planned around it the way you plan around weather, not by hoping it wouldn't come, but by making sure you were ready when it did. In the atrium, heading for the exit, they passed the golden fountain, and Harry paused and looked at it. The statue at the center, the witch and wizard, the centaur and goblin and house elf all gathered in postures of admiring deference, and he looked at it with an expression that Arabella couldn't quite read. Then he looked at Ragnarok. The goblin in that fountain, he said. Is it accurate? Ragnarok looked at the statue. His expression was the expression of a goblin who has looked at that fountain many times and had the same thought many times. No, he said. We should fix that at some point, Harry said. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes. We should. They walked out into the London evening, and Neville fell into step beside Harry, and Arabella watched the 2 boys walk ahead, Harry straight-backed and purposeful, Neville slightly bouncing on his heels from the energy of the day, and she thought about Lily Potter's letter, sitting in her bag in a sealed copy, he must be loved. Well, she thought. We're working on it, Lily. We're working on it. Chapter 3, The Boy in Azkaban. The review took 6 weeks. Harry spent them learning. Ragnarok had, with the quiet efficiency of someone correcting a long-standing wrong, opened the full Potter family library, 3,000 volumes, catalogued and sealed in a Gringotts maintained vault since James and Lily's deaths, and arranged for Harry to access it via a reading room on the bank's 3rd floor. Harry went every day. He went at 8 in the morning and stayed until Arabella came to collect him at 5, and in between he read with the focused intensity of someone who has been starving and has just been shown a kitchen. Not just magic theory. Law. History. Politics. The ancient inheritance codes that governed wizarding Britain with a thoroughness that the modern ministry had spent 2 centuries pretending didn't apply to it. He read the founding charters of the Wizengamot. He read the original Hogwarts Deed of Governance. He read the accounts of the Goblin Wars with the attention of someone who understood that history was not background but instruction. Neville came 3 days a week. He read slower than Harry and asked more questions, which Harry answered with the directness of someone who didn't see the point in being vague about things that were simply facts. They developed a rhythm, Harry reading ahead and Neville catching up, and their conversations in the breaks had the quality of two people who had both spent significant time being underestimated and were finding it unexpectedly comfortable to be around someone who simply didn't do that. "Did you know," Neville said one afternoon, looking up from a volume on blood inheritance law, "that technically, the Longbottom line has 3 Wisengamot seats and my gran only uses 2? "Yes," Harry said, without looking up. "How long have you known that?" "Since last Thursday." "And you didn't say anything?" Harry did look up then. "It's your family's business. I figured you'd find it when you got there." Neville looked at him for a moment. "You're strange," he said, but the way he said it made it clearly a compliment, and Harry went back to his book with something that was almost a smile. On the 23rd day of the review, Amelia Bones sent a memo. Not to Arabella, not to Ragnarok, but directly to Harry, addressed with his full formal title, Lord Potter Peveril et al., which was the first time anyone from the ministry had used his titles in official correspondence, and which Arabella noted made Harry look at the envelope for a long moment before he opened it. The memo said that the formal review of the Sirius Black arrest record had been completed. The findings were classified pending official proceedings, but Amelia Bones, speaking, her note made clear, entirely in her personal capacity, wanted him to know that the file had been submitted to the full Wisengamot review panel and that a formal hearing had been scheduled. 2 weeks away. She also said, in the last line, written by hand rather than typed, "Prepare something to say. You'll want to be there." Augusta Longbottom's house was called Longbottom Hall, and it was exactly what its name suggested, a large, rambling Somerset manor that had been in the family since the 15th century and had accumulated, over those centuries, the specific lived-in grandeur of a place that had been genuinely important for a very long time. It smelled of beeswax and old books and the aggressive floral arrangements that Augusta deployed throughout the ground floor like defensive fortifications. Harry had been there twice before, both times for legal strategy sessions, but this visit was different. This visit was preparation. Augusta had pulled in a wizarding solicitor named Edmund Blackwood, who was 64 and had white hair and the expression of a man who had spent his entire career swimming against the current of wizarding institutional inertia and had developed excellent shoulders for it. He'd read the full file, he'd reviewed every piece of documentation, and he'd arrived at Longbottom Hall with a briefcase that appeared to be significantly heavier than physics should permit and a demeanor that said he had been looking forward to this case since the moment he'd heard about it. "Right," he said, spreading documents across Augusta's enormous dining table while Augusta poured everyone tea with the focused hospitality of a general supplying her troops. "The Wisengamot hearing is in 14 days. The procedural goal is straightforward. We establish that the arrest was made without trial, the imprisonment was consequently illegal, and the individual must be released immediately pending any properly constituted proceedings." He looked over his glasses at Harry. "The political goal is more complex." "Dumbledore will fight it," Harry said. He was sitting with his hands flat on the table, reading the spread of documents the way he read everything, fast, comprehensive, already ahead. "He'll try to table it," Blackwood said. "He still holds the position of Chief Warlock. He can't kill the review outright, not with Amelia Bones having officially opened it, but he can delay. Request additional review periods. Question the standing of the petitioner." He paused. "Question your standing. On what grounds?" "Age, primarily. There is an argument, a bad argument, but one he could make, that a minor lacks full Wisengamot standing regardless of hereditary title. The founding charter of the Wisengamot grants full voting and standing rights to any holder of a hereditary lordship regardless of age," Harry said. Page 47 of the original charter, amended in 1402 to clarify that the only requirement is the legal holding of the title, not majority. He paused. The 1402 amendment was specifically requested by the Dumbledore family's ancestor, incidentally, to protect a 14-year-old lord whose title was being contested. The silence around the table had a particular quality. "How," said Blackwood slowly, "do you know that?" "Gringotts library," Harry said. "They have the original annotated copies." Blackwood set down his pen. He looked at Augusta. Augusta looked back at him with the expression of a woman who had been watching this for 6 weeks and had stopped being surprised by it. "All right," Blackwood said. He picked his pen back up. "Then we prepare for delay tactics. If he can't challenge your standing, he'll challenge the evidence. The blood rite results are certified by Gringotts under ancient magical law," Harry said. "They are not subject to ministry evidentiary standards because they predate the ministry by approximately 9 centuries. "Yes," Blackwood said. He was writing faster now. "Yes, exactly right. And the transfer document is the only clean piece of paper in the file, which means it can't be challenged on procedural grounds without calling into question the authorization that Dumbledore himself signed." Harry looked at the documents on the table. He's trapped by his own carefulness. He made sure the transfer was clean because he needed it to hold. But a clean transfer with no trial behind it isn't a defense. It's evidence. Blackwood put his pen down again. He looked at Harry. He looked at Augusta. "Augusta," he said. "Yes," she said. "How old is he?" "7, she said. "Nearly 8. "Right," said Blackwood. He picked up his pen. He kept his thoughts on the matter strictly to himself. The hearing was on a Wednesday, which felt wrong. World-altering things should happen on more dramatic days, Arabella thought, but the Wizengamot ran on its own schedule and Wednesdays were apparently what was available. They arrived at the ministry at 8:30, an hour before the session opened, and the atrium was different from the last time. More people, for one thing. The news had moved in the weeks since the filings, not in the Prophet, not officially, but the way things always moved in the wizarding world, through conversation and fluke calls and the specific social osmosis of a small community where everyone knew everyone and everyone was talking. People were looking. Harry walked through the atrium with Ragnarok on his left and Blackwood on his right and Augusta and Arabella behind them, and Neville slightly to the side because he'd come again and again. Augusta had decided not to fight it, and Harry didn't look at the people looking at him. He looked straight ahead, not because he was performing confidence but because he simply didn't find it interesting. What was interesting was in the courtroom ahead. The Wizengamot chamber was a circular room below the ministry, stone-walled and high-ceilinged, with tiered seats arranged around a central floor space in concentric rings. It was nearly full. Arabella hadn't expected that. Regular sessions drew perhaps a third of the seated members, but this was closer to 2/3, and the ones she recognized were not the usual mid-level attendees. These were the old blood families, the hereditary seats, the people who had received the news about Harry's filings and had come to see what it meant. Augusta took her seats in the second tier. Arabella found a place in the gallery with Neville, who was gripping the railing with both hands and trying to look casual about it. Harry walked to the central floor. He didn't sit in the petitioner's chair, the low chair in the center that was traditionally used for witnesses and defendants. He stood beside it, and he put his hands at his sides, and he looked up at the tiered seats with clear, composed green eyes, and the chamber, which had been murmuring, gradually went quiet. Albus Dumbledore was in the chief warlock's chair at the top of the chamber. He was wearing purple robes and a magnificent silver-streaked beard and an expression of gentle, settled authority, and he looked down at Harry with an expression that was, and this was what made Arabella's hands go cold, warm. Genuinely warm. The expression of a man looking at a child he cares for. Harry looked back at him. Neither of them looked away. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then Dumbledore raised his hand to open the session, and his eyes moved to the chamber at large, and the hearing began. Blackwood argued the procedural case cleanly and thoroughly, taking 40 minutes to lay out every document, every gap in the record, every procedural violation, every legal standard that had been bypassed in the arrest and imprisonment of Sirius Black. He was precise and unflappable, and when the first challenge came, from a Wizengamot member named Knott, who questioned the validity of the blood rite documentation as the basis for the petition, Harry leaned over and said something quietly in Blackwood's ear, and Blackwood nodded once and cited the 1402 Wizengamot Charter Amendment with the page number and the specific subsection, and Knott subsided. The second challenge came from Dumbledore himself. He did it graciously. He always did things graciously, which Arabella thought was perhaps the most dangerous thing about him. He raised a concern, in measured and reasonable tones, about the precedential implications of opening a full review of an arrest made by senior ministry officials in the immediate aftermath of a national crisis. He spoke about the chaos of that time, the urgency of the decisions that had been made, the extraordinary circumstances that had required extraordinary measures. He didn't look at Harry while he spoke. He addressed the chamber. Harry waited until he finished. Then he stood up straighter and said, "May I respond?" Dumbledore looked at him. Still warm. Still gentle. "Of course, Harry." "Lord Potter," Harry said. Quietly, without heat. "Just a correction." The chamber was very still. "Of course," Dumbledore said. Something moved behind his eyes. "Lord Potter." "Extraordinary circumstances," Harry said, addressing not Dumbledore but the chamber, the way Blackwood had taught him, is a legal standard with a specific definition under the Emergency Powers Act of 1914. For extraordinary circumstances to justify a bypass of trial procedure, the accused must present an active, immediate threat to public safety that cannot be contained by normal detention. He looked up at the tiers. Sirius Black was in ministry custody. He was not an active, immediate threat. He was a contained, arrested individual who had a legal right to trial. The extraordinary circumstances standard does not apply, and citing the chaos of wartime as a justification for skipping it is not a legal argument. It is an explanation for why someone chose not to follow the law. Those are different things. A significant fraction of the chamber was looking at him with varying intensities of astonishment. A smaller fraction, Augusta among them, and 2 or 3 others whose names Arabella was starting to learn, looked satisfied in the way people look when something they've been waiting for finally happens. Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that had not changed in its warmth. That was the part that was hardest to watch. Because the warmth was real, Arabella thought, or at least, it was something that Dumbledore experienced as warmth, which might not be the same thing as warmth but was sufficiently close to it that distinguishing between them from the outside required a very cold eye. The vote was called. 41 members voted for the formal review to proceed. 19 voted against. 11 abstained. Sirius Black's case was officially reopened. The legal process of officially exonerating someone and extracting them from Azkaban took, even on an expedited basis with Amelia Bones personally overseeing it, 9 more days. Harry knew this intellectually. He spent those 9 days with the specific tight energy of someone who knows that time is passing correctly and cannot make it pass faster and is irritated by this fact. On the 8th day, a ministry owl arrived with a document that required Harry's signature as Sirius's legal next of kin, the form that authorized the release and designated Harry as the responsible party for Sirius's immediate care and housing. Harry signed it without hesitation and handed it back to the owl, and then he sat in Ragnarok's reading room and stared at the wall for a while. "Are you nervous?" Neville asked, from behind his book. "No," Harry said. "You've been staring at that wall for 20 minutes. I'm thinking." "About what?" Harry was quiet for a moment. "About meeting someone for the first time who is also family." He looked at the wall. "I don't know how that works." Neville set his book down and considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I think," he said slowly, "it's probably the same as meeting anyone else for the first time. Except more." Harry looked at him. "More what?" "Just more." Harry thought about this. "That's not very helpful." "No," Neville agreed. "But I think it's true." They took a ministry transport, a sealed carriage that traveled the water route to the island, because Azkaban sat on a rock in the North Sea and the journey there and back was the kind of thing that required preparation. Amelia Bones came personally. Blackwood came with the release documentation. Augusta came because she'd been fighting for this moment for 6 years and was not about to miss it. Arabella came because she'd come to everything else and she wasn't stopping now. Harry stood at the prow of the carriage as the island came into view in the grey morning light, and he looked at it without expression, and Arabella stood beside him and didn't say anything, because some things didn't need commentary. Azkaban was worse in person than in description. Not because of the building itself, though the building was bleak enough, grey stone on grey rock above grey sea, but because of the feeling. They were still 50 yards from the dock when Arabella felt it, a cold that had nothing to do with the October wind, a creeping downward pressure on every good memory she'd ever had, like something was reaching through her chest and looking for warmth to steal. She'd known what Dementors were. She'd never been near one. Harry didn't react. He just looked at the building, and then he turned to Amelia Bones and said, "How many Dementors are here?" "We estimate around 200, Amelia said, clipped and professional, clearly fighting the same pull that Arabella was. "And they're going to be surrounding him when we go in. Protocol requires that we have warden escort, which means Dementors in the corridor. Can we move faster once we're inside?" "Yes," Amelia said, and looked at him. "We'll move as fast as we can." The inside of Azkaban was what happened when despair became architecture. The corridors were lit by torches that somehow made things dimmer rather than brighter, and the silence had a texture, and Arabella kept her eyes forward and her mind on fixed, specific things, her cats, her garden, the smell of Lily's kitchen in the old days, and it helped, a little. The Dementors were shapes in the peripheral dark, tall and robed and cold, and the cold intensified as they moved deeper. Harry walked through it. Not around it, not despite it, through it, the way water moves through a space, occupying it fully without being altered by it. Arabella watched him and couldn't decide if what she was seeing was extraordinary mental discipline or something more than that, something that had to do with what had come off him in the ritual room. The light that had poured outward. The scorch mark on the ceiling. Cell 7 was at the end of a corridor on the north block. The door was iron, old and salt-corroded, and when the warden opened it Arabella braced for something, she wasn't sure what, but something, and what she got was a small, grey-lit room, a stone ledge, a thin blanket, and a man who had once been one of the most brilliantly charismatic figures of his generation. What was left of Sirius Black was thin in a way that spoke of years rather than weeks, with long dark hair matted and filthy and eyes that were very dark and very still and a face that had been young and was not young anymore. He was sitting with his back against the wall and his knees up to his chest, and he looked at the door opening with the expression of a man who had long since stopped expecting anything good to come through it. He looked at the people in the doorway. His eyes went past Amelia Bones. Past Blackwood. Past Augusta. They went straight to Harry, the way a compass needle goes to north, and they stayed there, and the stillness in his face cracked all at once, not loudly, not dramatically, just a fissure running through it the way ice cracks in spring. "Prongs," he said. And then, immediately, as though correcting himself from a long way away, "No. No, you're," his voice was rough from disuse, scraping out of him. "You're Harry." "Yes," Harry said. He didn't move. He let Sirius look. "You look exactly like James," Sirius said. "Except, the eyes," Harry said. "I know." Sirius made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. Then he looked at Harry with those dark, still eyes and said, "How old are you?" 7. "Nearly 8. You're very small." "You're very thin," Harry said. Sirius looked at him for another moment. Then, slowly, like someone remembering how it worked, the corner of his mouth moved. "Fair point," he said. Getting Sirius out of Azkaban was procedurally uncomplicated and physically wrenching in the way that all things are that involve a human body that has been confined and malnourished for years, and the transport back was very quiet. Sirius sat wrapped in a blanket with a warming charm on it, and he drank the soup that Amelia Bones had apparently thought to bring in a sealed container, and he looked at the sea outside the carriage window with the expression of someone relearning what the world looked like when it was large and open. Harry sat across from him and didn't push. He just was there, present and steady, the way he was present and steady in all things, and Arabella watched the two of them across the carriage, the man who had lost everything and the boy who had been trying to get it back, and felt the shape of something between them that was not yet what it would become but already pointed in the right direction. At some point, Sirius looked away from the sea and said, "How did you do it?" "You're 7. Nearly 8. Harry." "I found out about the inheritances," Harry said. "And about you being my guardian. And about there being no trial." He shrugged with one shoulder. "So we dealt with it." "We." Ragnarok. Mrs. Longbottom. Mrs. Figg. Mr. Blackwood. Harry paused. "Neville, a bit." "Who's Neville?" "My friend." Sirius looked at him. "You have friends." "One, currently," Harry said. "I'm working on it." Sirius made the sound again that was somewhere between a laugh and not. He looked at Harry with those dark eyes that were slowly, by degrees, becoming less like the eyes of a man in Azkaban and more like the eyes of a man in the world. "Dumbledore's going to know," he said. "That you got me out." "He's going to, I know," Harry said. "He's not, Harry, you have to understand what he's capable of." "I know," Harry said again, and something in his voice, that resonance, that weight, made Sirius stop and look at him very carefully. "You really aren't afraid of him," Sirius said. "Not a question." Something between surprised and something that looked like wonder. "He stole 89 lordships from me," Harry said. "He put you in Azkaban. He left me with people who," he stopped. Something crossed his face. "Then it was gone." "No. I'm not afraid of him. I'm going to take back everything he took and make sure he can't do it to anyone else." Sirius looked at him for a long time. The sea moved past outside. The grey light was softening toward afternoon. "James would have," Sirius said quietly, "absolutely loved you." Harry looked at the window. His jaw moved. "Tell me about him," he said. "When you're ready." "Yeah," Sirius said. His voice was rough again. "Yeah, I will." They put Sirius in a Gringotts maintained safe house while his legal status was fully clarified and while the healers, Goblin and Wizarding both, assessed the damage 12 years in Azkaban had done, and the assessment was a sober document that listed physical deficiencies, nutritional damage, some degree of hearing loss in the left ear from years of near-total silence, and a series of notations about psychological impact that the healers described in clinical language that Arabella found. She could only read a few lines of before she needed to put it down. Sirius, for his part, took the healer assessments with the particular dry humor of a man who has decided that being alive and outside is a sufficient baseline and everything else is recoverable. "They want me to eat 6 times a day," he told Harry, on their third visit to the safe house, in a tone of deep personal affront. "You weigh about as much as a decent-sized Labrador," Harry said. "Yes. I'd like to register an objection." "Noted. Eat your lunch." Sirius ate his lunch with the sulky dignity of a man who was absolutely going to comply and wanted full acknowledgement of how unreasonable this was, and Harry sat at the kitchen table of the safe house eating his own lunch and reading a legal document that Blackwood had sent, and Arabella, sitting in the corner with her tea, thought about how entirely natural this looked, this very thin, slowly recovering man and this very small, very old-souled boy, and felt something settle in her chest. That had been tight for a long time. On the 5th day, Sirius was well enough for a longer conversation, and he sat at the kitchen table with Harry and talked for 3 hours. About James. About Lily. About what they'd been like, what they'd believed in, what they'd laughed at. About the war and what it had cost and what they'd thought they were fighting for. Harry asked questions that were precise and unsentimental, and Sirius answered them with the honesty of a man who had had 12 years to decide what the truth of his own history was, and Arabella, who had excused herself to give them space, could hear the shape of it through the kitchen wall, the rhythm of it, question and answer and the occasional silence and then more question, and she was very careful not to look like she was listening. At one point she heard Sirius say, quietly, he wasn't afraid either. Your dad drove me absolutely mad sometimes. James would walk into situations that should have terrified him and just not be afraid. I always thought it was recklessness. Was it? Harry said. No, Sirius said. I think, looking back, I think it was that he knew exactly what he was doing and why. And when you're that clear on why, the fear kind of moves out of the way. Silence. Then Harry said, that makes sense. Yeah, Sirius said. It does now. The formal exoneration of Sirius Black was published in the Daily Prophet on a Thursday morning under the headline, Wizengamot overturns wrongful imprisonment, Black freed after 12 years without trial. It was a front-page story, 3 columns wide, with a quote from Amelia Bones about procedural integrity and a notably brief quote from the Chief Warlock's office that said only that Albus Dumbledore supported the Wizengamot's decision and wished Mr. Black well in his recovery. There was also, in the inside pages, a smaller article, Potter Lordship Reclamations Reach Wizengamot Registry. The article was 3 paragraphs, factual, and notably free of the purple prose the Prophet usually favored. It listed the number of reclamations filed, confirmed that they were being processed, and noted that the claimant was Harry James Potter, aged 7. Sirius read both articles at the kitchen table of the safe house, leaning back in his chair, with the morning light through the window and a cup of tea going cold at his elbow because he'd forgotten about it. When he finished, he set the paper down and said nothing for a while. Then he said, Dumbledore's note to the Prophet. Wishes me well in my recovery. Yes, Harry said, not looking up from his own reading. He put me in Azkaban. Yes. And he wishes me well. He believes it, Harry said. That's what makes him dangerous. He thinks he did what was right, and now that it's been corrected, he genuinely wishes you well, because in his mind the situation has been resolved and everyone should move on. He turned a page. He's going to approach me. Soon. To have a conversation about moving forward constructively. He'll be warm about it. Sirius stared at him. How old are you? 7, Harry said. Nearly 8. Stop asking. Harry. Harry looked up. When he approaches you, Sirius said, and his voice was quieter now, serious in a way that had nothing to do with trauma and everything to do with genuine, clear-eyed warning, be careful. Not because he'll hurt you directly. That's not his method. His method is, he stopped, finding the words. He makes you feel like disagreeing with him is the same as being wrong. Like his judgment is just, the shape of good sense itself. And he's so bloody warm about it that you start to wonder if you're the problem. Harry looked at him steadily. I'll be fine. James thought he'd be fine too. James didn't have 89 lordships and Ragnarok, Harry said. Sirius was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, fair point. He picked up his tea. It was cold. He drank it anyway, looking out the window at the pale autumn sun, and Harry went back to his reading, and outside the Prophet was making its rounds through Wizarding Britain, and in the Ministry building, in a circular office with a lot of silver instruments and a sleeping phoenix, a man in half-moon spectacles was reading the same front page with an expression that was, on its surface, entirely serene. The instruments ticked. The phoenix breathed. The chess pieces were moving. Chapter 4, A school built on stolen ground. 4 years passed the way they do when life actually has something in it, fast and full, and punctuated by moments that, looking back, were clearly the moments that mattered. Harry turned 8 in a house that was actually his. One of the Potter properties, a farmhouse in Devon with a garden that had gone wild and a library that hadn't been touched since James was a teenager, had been released from the inheritance block within 3 months of the Gringotts filing, and Arabella had moved in as his legal guardian under the terms Amelia Bones had quietly arranged, and Sirius, once he was legally cleared and physically something approaching functional, had moved into the East Wing with the specific chaotic energy of a man who had been in a stone box for 12 years and was compensating enthusiastically. The farmhouse became a place. That was the only way to describe it that felt true. It became somewhere that smelled like cooking and old books and the particular warm electrical smell of active magic, where Sirius filled the kitchen with failed culinary experiments and Arabella filled the sitting room with cats and Harry filled every available surface with documents and books and the occasional piece of parchment covered in diagrams that Sirius called worrying and Ragnarok called promising. Harry got his wand at 8.5, 14 inches, holly and phoenix feather, Ollivander blinking at him over his half-moon glasses and saying, very quietly, that he remembered the twin of this wand, and he started casting things within the hour. Not the tentative, wondering magic of a child discovering something new. The focused, purposeful magic of someone who knows exactly what the tool is for and wants to understand its limits. By 9 he was doing magic that Sirius, who was a legitimate prodigy himself, called unfair. By 10 Harry had read every text in the Potter library, written extensive notes in the margins of 12 of them, and started corresponding with a master-level charms practitioner in France whose work on runic amplification systems he thought was missing a fundamental insight. The French charms master wrote back, somewhat defensively. Then, upon receiving Harry's second letter, considerably more interestedly. Neville came to the farmhouse so often that the East spare room developed a Neville-specific quality, books on herbology and a battered Gryffindor poster and the particular comfortable disorder of a space that's regularly inhabited by someone who feels at home. Their friendship had the easy, durable quality of something built on genuine mutual recognition. Neville was getting better at magic, not explosively, not dramatically, but steadily, the way good things often grow, and Harry had the specific talent of making him feel like his best was worth something, which was, Arabella thought, a talent that looked simple and wasn't. They also got Hermione Granger. Not immediately and not easily. She came to their attention at age 9, when a letter arrived at the farmhouse, forwarded by Ragnarok from the Gringotts mailroom, because somehow the letter had been addressed to Lord Potter Peveril's legal team, care of Gringotts, that was 12 pages long, precisely formatted, and written by a Muggleborn which named Hermione Jane Granger, who had been doing her own research on wizarding inheritance law and had found 17 procedural irregularities in the standard Muggleborn registration process that she believed constituted systemic discrimination and would like to discuss. She was 9. The letter had footnotes. Harry wrote back the same day. She came to the farmhouse 2 weeks later with her parents, who were dentists from Hampstead with the specific careful alertness of people encountering a genuinely new world for the first time, and she walked in and looked at the library and at Harry and at the documents on every surface and at Sirius, who was making lunch and singing to himself, and she said, "You've read all of these?" "Most of them twice," Harry said. She looked at his notes in the margins of the nearest volume. "These are good," she said, in the tone of someone who had prepared to be politely disappointed and was genuinely surprised. "Your letter had good citations," Harry said. "Yours had better ones." "Neville," from the sofa, "it takes about a week before you get used to them, if that helps." Hermione looked at Neville. Then at Harry. Then she said, "What are you actually going to do about the Muggleborn registration irregularities?" "Fix them," Harry said. "But the Wisengamot needs 2 more seats on our side before we have the votes for a formal reform bill. We're working on it." He paused. "You could help, if you want. There's a legal theory about the founding charter's equal magic clause that I think applies, but I need someone to work through the case law." Hermione sat down on the nearest chair. She took out a notebook. "Tell me about the equal magic clause," she said. Sirius appeared in the kitchen doorway, spatula in hand, and looked at Harry with an expression of profound recognition. "Merlin help us," he said. "There are 2 of them now." The reclamation process moved in waves. The first 20 lordships were cleared within the first year, the ones with the most straightforward documentation, the simplest inheritance chains, the least contested legal ground. They arrived with a quiet, building authority that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with accumulation. Harry didn't hold press conferences. He didn't make speeches. The formal notifications went to the Wisengamot registry, the vaults were unsealed, the properties were inventoried, and the political weight of it settled into the consciousness of wizarding Britain with the slow, undeniable mass of a tide coming in. By Harry's 10th birthday, 53 lordships had been cleared. He held 31 direct Gringotts seats and had proxies over 11 more held by sympathetic members. He was, by any reasonable measure, the single most politically powerful individual in wizarding Britain who wasn't currently occupying an official office. Dumbledore, to his credit, didn't pretend this wasn't happening. He wrote letters, warm, thoughtful, beautifully composed letters on Hogwarts stationery that acknowledged the reclamations, expressed what seemed like genuine satisfaction at the correction of injustices, and gently, consistently, subtly suggested that Harry's energy and gifts would be best directed toward unification rather than confrontation, toward building bridges rather than. Harry read the third letter, wrote a note at the bottom of it that said still enemy of magic. Still planning to address that fully. Best, Lord Potter Peveril, and sent it back. Sirius read the exchange over Harry's shoulder and laughed until he had to sit down. The reply came 2 days later. It was notably shorter than Dumbledore's usual letters, and the warmth in it had, if one was reading carefully, a very slight quality of recalibration. He had not, Harry thought, expected that. Good. Hogwarts letters arrived on a July morning when Harry was 11, delivered by the usual owl to the farmhouse, and Harry opened his with Sirius peering over his shoulder and Neville sitting across the breakfast table with his own already open, and Hermione, who had arrived the previous day for a working visit, reading hers with an expression of intense, slightly overwhelmed joy that she was unsuccessfully attempting to moderate into something more controlled. "I've been reading the course texts," she said. "All of them. The standard ones and the supplementary ones and some of the advanced ones that flourish and blot stocks for Newt level. Do you think they'll let me test out of the first-year curriculum?" "Probably not officially," Harry said. "But the practical question is whether Hogwarts is the right place to learn anything at all given its current governance structure." He looked at the letter. "The Board of Governors needs addressing." Sirius sat down. "Harry. It's a school. It's a school that sits on a Hogwarts founder's deed of governance that has been illegally modified," Harry said. "The original deed gives the hereditary holders of the 4 founders' lines, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, 3 seats each on the Board of Governors and final say over the appointment of the Headmaster." He set the letter down. "I hold all 4 lines." The kitchen was quiet for a moment except for the sound of Hermione's quill, which had started moving across her notebook. "You hold," Sirius said carefully, "all 4 founders' lines. They were all old magical families. The inheritance routes converge about 4 centuries back through various blood adoption and last-of-kin transfers." Harry picked up his tea. "I have 12 seats on the Board of Governors. There are 40 seats total. Current sitting members include 3 who've been trying to contact me about reform for 2 years and 7 who would switch given sufficient reason." "How many does Dumbledore have?" Neville asked. "Directly?" "None. He's the headmaster, he sits at the board's pleasure. But he has influence over approximately 14 members who've served during his tenure and regard his judgment as essentially infallible." Harry paused. "Or did, before the Sirius situation." Sirius made a face. "Can we not call it the Sirius situation?" "The wrongful imprisonment crisis," Harry offered. "Better. Still not great. Are we going to Hogwarts or not?" Neville asked, with the directness of someone who wanted a concrete answer to a concrete question. "Yes," Harry said. "Of course we are. I'm just also going in as a board member." He looked at his letter again. "Which means I need to declare my seats before the 1st of September. He declared them on a Tuesday in August, via formal written notification to all 40 Board of Governors members, the Ministry's Department of Magical Education, and the Headmaster of Hogwarts personally. The notification was dry and procedural, and 3 pages of legal language that Blackwood had drafted and Harry had revised twice, and buried in page 2 was the quiet, devastating news that 12 hereditary board seats had been formally claimed and that the current governance framework of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry would require review under the terms of the founder's original deed. The response from the board came within a week, a formal acknowledgement, slightly stunned in tone, confirming the seat declaration and noting that a governance review would be scheduled at the board's earliest convenience. The response from Dumbledore came within 3 days, and it was the longest letter he'd written yet, 4 pages of warmth and welcome and the gentle suggestion that governance matters were perhaps best addressed through existing institutional channels and that Harry's energy and gifts would certainly be. Harry wrote back, "I look forward to seeing you in September. Please ensure the board governance review is scheduled before the Christmas break. Best, Lord Potter Peveril." He sent a copy of both letters to Ragnarok, who filed them in the rapidly expanding legal record with the care of a man who knows he'll need them eventually. September 1st was warm and slightly overcast, which felt appropriate for a day that was going to be consequential. The Hogwarts Express had the usual organized chaos of hundreds of children and their parents and their owls and their mountains of luggage, and Harry moved through it with Neville at his left and Hermione at his right and Sirius behind them in Muggle clothes, carrying Harry's trunk with the specific expression of a man who has decided that being visibly emotional about watching his godson go to school is completely acceptable and is prepared to defend this position. "You're going to write," Sirius said, for the 4th time. "Yes," Harry said. "Every week?" "Yes." "And if Dumbledore," Sirius. "I'm just saying, I know what you're saying," Harry said. "I'll be fine." He turned and looked at his godfather, this tall, dark-haired man who had come out of Azkaban looking like something the sea had processed and had, over 4 years, become something that was genuinely, recognizably Sirius Black, alive and present and capable of filling a room, and he held eye contact for a moment with the steadiness that was simply how he was, always. "I'll be fine," he said again. Sirius looked at him. Then he grabbed him into a hug that was brief and fierce and slightly graceless, and Harry submitted to it with the specific air of someone who is not naturally given to effusive physical expression and is making a genuine exception, and then he stepped back and picked up his bag. Neville had been conducting a similar, somewhat more tearful farewell with Augusta, who was not crying, precisely, but whose eyes were doing something more than their usual precise attention. Hermione had hugged her parents twice each and was now conducting herself with great composure and only slightly pink eyes. They found a compartment. The train moved. London fell away and gave way to countryside, green rolling hills under the pale September sky, and Harry sat with his back to the direction of travel. He could see more of the compartment this way, and read a document from Blackwood while Hermione organized her books and Neville ate a sandwich from Augusta's inexhaustible supply of packed food. A knock on the compartment door produced 2 red-haired boys who looked at the occupants with the cheerful assessment of people who habitually made friends quickly and easily. The elder one said, "Any room? Everywhere else is full." "Sit down," Harry said, without looking up. They sat. The elder one stuck out a hand. "Fred Weasley." "George Weasley," said the other. "Harry Potter," Harry said, still reading. The twins exchanged a glance that was about 8 different things at once. Fred said, "We know who you are." "Most people do," Harry agreed. "We heard about the Lordship reclamations," George said, with the air of someone raising a topic they're genuinely interested in. Harry looked up at that. He looked at them, really looked, the way he looked at everything, taking inventory. "What did you hear?" "That you're taking apart everything Dumbledore built piece by piece," Fred said. "Legally. Systematically. Without raising your voice." "That last part," George said, "is either incredibly boring or incredibly terrifying." "Probably both," Harry said. The twins looked at each other again, and then Fred said, with the air of a man making a business decision, "We should be friends." "Probably," Harry agreed, and went back to his document. Hermione, across the compartment, caught Neville's eye. Neville shrugged with the equanimity of someone who had been watching this for 4 years. The twins started unpacking what appeared to be the contents of a small joke shop, and outside the window Scotland began. Hogwarts in the late afternoon light looked exactly like it was supposed to look, massive and ancient and lit by the setting sun in a way that turned the stone to amber, towers rising against a sky that was going pink and violet at the edges. The boats crossed the lake in near silence, all of them looking up, and even Harry, who did not make a habit of being visibly moved by things, looked at it for a long moment before the boat reached the far shore. It was old, he thought. Genuinely old in the way that meant layers, the weight of every class that had sat in those halls, every argument and discovery and midnight rule-breaking and first spell and last goodbye. Whatever the politics of its governance, whatever the institutional failures of its current administration, Hogwarts itself was something that predated all of it and would post-date it too. He walked through the oak doors with the other first years and thought, I own 12 seats on your governing board and I am going to fix every broken thing about how you're run. Then he looked at the ceiling of the great hall, the bewitched night sky, vast and star-scattered, and thought, this is also extraordinary and I'm glad to be here. Both things. At once. The sorting was unremarkable until it wasn't. The hat went through the usual first years with its usual mix of clear decisions and long deliberations, and Hermione was sorted into Gryffindor in under 30 seconds with an expression of intense satisfaction, and Neville took about a minute and a half and went Gryffindor in the end with a look of pure relief, and then the name Potter, Harry was called and the Great Hall did what it always does when the famous name is said in a new space, went quiet, fast, with the specific hush of hundreds of people who are used to thinking they know what something is and are reconsidering. Harry walked to the stool with the same purposeful ease he walked everywhere, and sat down, and the hat dropped over his eyes. The darkness inside the hat had a texture. Old magic, very old, layered in the brim and the crown and every thread of it, and then a voice, dry, thoughtful, with the particular quality of something that had been listening to humans for 1,000 years and was genuinely interested in the current one. Well, said the hat. That's something I haven't felt in a while. Harry waited. You know what you are, the hat said. It wasn't a question. Getting there, Harry thought back. Itchem. The hat seemed to be doing something. Reading, or tasting, or some goblin equivalent that had no good word in English. You have the courage and the fire, but it's not performance, it's structure. You have the ambition, but it's principled. You have the wit and the scholarship, and the patience to use it properly. You have the loyalty, and the rarity of it being chosen loyalty rather than assumed. Harry said nothing. Where do you want to go? Where I'll do the most good, Harry thought. And where my friends are. Gryffindor, then, the hat said, with something that was not quite amusement, but you could have had your pick. And I'll say this, whichever house held you would have found it interesting. Gryffindor, the hat announced. The Gryffindor table erupted in the way Gryffindor tables do, and Harry walked to it and sat down next to Hermione and across from Neville and registered, briefly, the sound of the applause, which was coming from every table, not just Gryffindor, and which had a quality that was different from the usual welcome new student noise. More considering. More weighted. He also registered, at the staff table, Albus Dumbledore watching him with an expression that was entirely warm, entirely benevolent, and entirely unlike the expression of a man who was recalculating, behind those half-moon spectacles and that magnificent beard, the specific challenge of managing a situation that was no longer behaving the way situations usually behaved. Harry met his eyes. He held them for a moment, the way he'd held them in the Wisengamot chamber 4 years ago. Then he turned to Hermione and said, "Pass the chicken." The feast was extraordinary in the way only Hogwarts feasts could be, absurd quantities of food materializing with casual magic, the house tables bright with noise and laughter, the enchanted ceiling shifting as full dark came on and the stars came out properly. Harry ate and listened and filed things away, the geography of the hall, the dynamics between houses, the way the staff table was arranged, the specific body language of a potions professor at the far end who looked like someone had replaced all his food with something that tasted like disappointment. After the feast, as the prefects were organizing their respective first-year groups, a sixth-year Gryffindor prefect named Percy Weasley, who was, Fred had informed Harry during the feast, their brother and a monumental prat, and who was both accurate descriptors, was giving a very thorough speech about Gryffindor Tower when a voice came from the doorway. Lord Potter Peveril. Everyone turned. The voice belonged to Professor McGonagall, who was standing in the entrance hall doorway with a scroll in her hand and an expression of careful professional composure. The headmaster would like a word before you go up. Percy Weasley had frozen mid-sentence. The other first years were looking at Harry. Harry stood, said, "Save me a spot," to Neville, and followed McGonagall. Dumbledore's office was circular and warm and full of the silver instruments that ticked and whirred on every surface, and the portrait gallery of previous headmasters who were all very awake and very interested, and a phoenix on a perch who regarded Harry with bright black eyes that were impossibly knowing. Dumbledore was standing when they came in, and he came around his desk with a warmth that was entirely real and extended his hand. Harry shook it. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "It is genuinely wonderful to see you here at last. Please, sit." "Lord Potter Peveril," Harry said pleasantly, and sat. A very brief pause. "Of course," Dumbledore said, and sat behind his desk with the grace of a man absorbing a correction without disruption. "I wanted to welcome you personally. Hogwarts is your home now, and I want you to know that whatever disagreements exist at the political level, inside these walls you are simply a student, and my door is always open to you." "That's very generous," Harry said. "I want to be clear that I intend to pursue the board governance review I notified you of in August. I'd like it scheduled before Christmas, as I mentioned in my letter. There's plenty of time to. The Founder's Deed specifies that governance reviews must be conducted within 4 months of a formal seat declaration," Harry said. "I declared in August. 4 months is December. I'd prefer to be ahead of the deadline rather than racing it." The silver instruments ticked. Dumbledore looked at Harry with those blue eyes, sharp behind their warmth, and Harry looked back, and the thing that happened between them in the silence was not quite a challenge, it was more like two people establishing, very precisely, what kind of conversation they were going to be capable of having with each other. "I'll speak to the board secretary," Dumbledore said. "Thank you," Harry said. "Is there anything else you need tonight?" "After such a long journey, no," Harry said. He stood. "Good evening, Headmaster." He walked to the door. He had his hand on the frame when Dumbledore said, "Harry." He paused, but didn't turn. "Whatever you believe about the past, I want you to know that everything I did because I believed it was right. Because I believed it would protect you." Harry was still for a moment. Then he said, without turning around, "I know." He paused. "That's what made it so easy for you to do it." And he walked out. The door closed. In the silence of the office, the instruments ticked, and the phoenix made a low, clear sound that wasn't quite sad and wasn't quite anything else, and the portraits of previous headmasters looked at each other without speaking. Gryffindor Tower was loud and bright and smelled of something warm and baked when Harry got back, some Hogwarts kitchen magic that manifested as late-night cocoa and biscuits on the common room table. The other first years had been distributed among various sofas and chairs and were in the process of the tentative, fast-paced social calibration of children discovering who they were going to be to each other. Fred and George had already claimed the best sofa and were conducting what appeared to be a small explosive experiment in one corner with the cheerful confidence of people who expected the relevant authority figures to be elsewhere. Neville had found a boy named Dean Thomas who shared his interest in something called football. Hermione had a book open. Harry sat in an armchair near the fire. He picked up his copy of the course schedule Blackwood had sent. He'd be in classes with everyone else, because Hogwarts education was foundational in ways that private study couldn't fully replicate, and because being here, present, watching how the institution worked from the inside, was strategically important, and he read it over once and then set it aside. He looked at the fire. For years since Gringotts. For years since Ragnarok had unrolled the parchment and the name had burned red at the bottom, and the world had rearranged itself around what that meant. 53 lordships reclaimed. Sirius free. Hermione and Neville and the twins. Augusta and Blackwood and Amelia Bones. A legal record that was growing steadily, systematically, towards something that couldn't be ignored. 36 to go. And now this, Hogwarts itself, the institution at the center of everything, where Dumbledore had ruled for decades with the gentle, absolute authority of someone who was regarded by most of the wizarding world as the safest person in it. Harry looked at the fire and thought about what the hat had said. "Where do you want to go?" "Where I'll do the most good." "Hey," said a voice. Fred dropped into the armchair across from him, twin-less for once, which gave him a slightly different quality, still sharp, still amused, but with something more personal underneath it. "How was the meeting?" "Productive," Harry said. "Is that what we're calling it when you stare down the most powerful wizard in Britain before you've even unpacked?" "I didn't stare him down," Harry said. "We had a conversation." "Right." Fred propped his feet on the table. And he's going to schedule the governance review before Christmas." Fred looked at him steadily. Then he said, "You know he's not going to just let it happen, right? The governance review, the reclamations, all of it. He's going to maneuver." "I know," Harry said. "And you're, what? Fine with that?" "I'm prepared for it," Harry said. "Which is different." He looked at the fire. "He's used to being the smartest person in the room. He's used to being able to see 12 moves ahead and having everyone else manage 3. That's how he's operated for 60 years. Harry paused. "The question is what happens when someone's looking at the same board and seeing 13. Fred was quiet for a moment. The fire crackled. From the corner, a small but definitive explosion suggested that George's experiment had entered a new phase. "You know," Fred said, "most people who come to Hogwarts are worried about making friends and not embarrassing themselves in charms class." "Those are also concerns," Harry said. "But lower priority. Significantly." Fred looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was less the performer and more the person, the sharp, genuine intelligence that lived under the persona, turned in Harry's direction and actually looking. Then he nodded once, with the air of a man who has made a final decision about something. "Right," he said. "What do you need?" Harry looked at him. Then he said, "I need people who know this school the way it actually works. Not the official version. The real one. Every passage, every shortcut, every pattern in how the staff move and where the blind spots are." "That," said Fred Weasley, sitting up straighter with the energy of a man receiving a job offer he's been waiting for, "is something we can absolutely provide." He paused. "There's also a map, but that's a separate conversation." "There's a map." "Separate conversation," Fred said. "We'll negotiate." Harry almost smiled. "Fair enough." Outside the tower windows, Hogwarts spread in the dark, its towers and courtyards and centuries of accumulated magic, and in the headmaster's office far below, the silver instruments ticked steadily on, and the chess pieces were moving again, and for the first time in a very long time, the board had a new player who wasn't asking permission and wasn't afraid of the dark. Chapter 5, Fire in the Great Hall. The first month of term established the rhythms quickly. Harry was, as a student, exactly what anyone paying attention should have expected and nobody had quite prepared for. He attended every class. He completed every assignment. He did not show off, exactly, showing off implied a desire for approval that he simply didn't have, but when he did magic, he did it with a precision and a depth that made professors go quiet in the specific way professors go quiet when something surprises them past their professional composure. Flitwick nearly fell off his stack of books the first time Harry cast a Wingardium Leviosa that held perfect form and then, seemingly on reflex, modified the charm's terminal point to set the feather down gently rather than just dropping it. Did you modify the terminus?" Flitwick asked. "It seemed more controlled," Harry said. "Was that wrong?" Flitwick stared at him. "That modification isn't taught until 3rd year." "Oh," Harry said. "I read ahead." McGonagall, in Transfiguration, stopped the class twice in 2 weeks, once when Harry transfigured a matchstick into a needle so precisely that it was indistinguishable under a magnification spell from a real one, and once when he asked a question about the theoretical basis of partial transfiguration that she answered, then thought about for the rest of the lesson, then addressed in a separate conversation with him after class that lasted 40 minutes and ended with her looking both intellectually satisfied and slightly alarmed. Snape was the interesting one. Potions was the class Harry had paid the most attention to in advance, because Snape was the variable he'd analyzed the least. He'd read everything he could find about Severus Snape, the Death Eater background, the spy history, the deep and complicated entanglement with Dumbledore that made him simultaneously one of the most compromised and most genuine figures in recent wizarding history. He had his own picture of who Snape was before he ever walked into the dungeons, and he held that picture lightly, because pictures formed from second-hand information were hypotheses, not facts. The first thing Snape did was ignore Harry entirely. Not pointedly. Not with the performative disdain he applied to most of the Gryffindors. He simply didn't single Harry out, didn't quiz him, didn't sneer at him, taught the class with the same cutting, exacting style he applied to everything and graded Harry's first practical with a T, troll, that was objectively wrong, because Harry's boil cure potion had been correct to every standard the textbook specified and the dungeon smelled pleasantly medicinal afterward. Harry looked at the grade. He looked at the potion. He kept his face entirely neutral, wrote a 14-line technical analysis of his process and submitted it with his next assignment, and waited. The second practical came back with an E, exceeds expectations. The analysis had no comment on it except a single line in Snape's angular handwriting, acceptable justification. Don't over-explain. Harry filed this interaction in the part of his mind where he kept things that were still developing and shouldn't be pushed. Neville was the one Snape went after, which Harry had also expected and had also prepared for, though preparation and watching it happen were different experiences. The second week of term, Snape reduced Neville to near tears over a melted cauldron, and the class went very still the way classes go still around cruelty, and Harry set down his own stirring rod and said, pleasantly, to nobody in particular, the textbook says to add the porcupine quills after removing from heat. The instructions on the board say during heating. Those aren't the same instruction. The dungeons were very quiet. Snape looked at Harry with eyes like polished flint. Are you suggesting, Mr. Potter, that the board is incorrect? I'm observing that there's a discrepancy, Harry said. If the board is correct, then the textbook is wrong, and Neville followed the textbook. If the textbook is correct, then the board instruction is the source of the error. Either way, the cauldron issue has an environmental cause. He paused. Professor. The silence stretched. Harry held Snape's gaze the way he held everyone's, without challenge and without retreat, simply present and entirely unmoved. Snape's jaw tightened. He looked at the board. He looked at Harry. He modified the board instruction with a tap of his wand, said nothing further about Neville's cauldron, and continued the class. Neville said nothing until they were in the corridor afterward. Then he said, very quietly, thank you. He put the wrong instruction on the board, Harry said. That's a fact. You still said it out loud in front of everyone. Facts don't become less true because saying them is inconvenient, Harry said. Come on, we'll be late for transfiguration. Neville followed him, and didn't say anything else, but for the rest of the day he walked slightly differently. Straighter. Like something had been put back in the right place. The board governance review was scheduled for the 22nd of November. Harry knew it was coming, had known the date for 3 weeks, had been in correspondence with Blackwood the entire time, had a complete briefing document prepared that ran to 40 pages and which Hermione had read, annotated, and returned with 17 questions that had improved it considerably. He also knew, because Augusta had confirmed it via letter, that Dumbledore had been conducting his own preparation, quietly working the board members he had influence over, shoring up positions, framing the narrative. What Dumbledore had not quite accounted for was that Harry had been working the board for 4 years. Not all of them. But the 3 who'd been trying to reach him since before Hogwarts, Governor Marchmont, Governor Aldridge, Governor Pruitt, had become, over years of careful correspondence and 2 in-person meetings each, something that was not quite allies in the formal sense but was absolutely allies in the practical sense. And the 7 who might switch with sufficient reason had been given, through Blackwood's office, a very careful legal briefing about what the Founder's Deed actually said versus what Hogwarts had actually been doing, and 4 of them had written back with responses that ranged from "this is troubling and I need to think about it" to "good lord, why has nobody done this before?" So when the board convened in the Hogwarts formal meeting chamber, a long room off the 3rd floor corridor that smelled of stone and old parchment, the political geography was different from what Dumbledore had prepared for. Harry arrived with Blackwood, who had come as his legal representative, and sat at the end of the long table in the seat that corresponded to his 12 declared positions, and the assembled board members, 23 of the 40 had come in person, the others represented by proxy, looked at this 11-year-old boy in Hogwarts robes sitting next to a gray-haired solicitor with a briefcase that defied physics, and most of them made some kind of involuntary adjustment to their previous expectations. Dumbledore sat at the opposite end of the table. The warmth was on, full and steady, the benevolent authority of a man entirely at ease in institutional settings. He opened the meeting graciously, acknowledged the formal nature of the review, spoke appreciatively of Harry's commitment to proper governance. He was very good at this. Harry let him finish. Then he said, "The review has 3 components. First, the question of whether the current governance structure of Hogwarts complies with the Founder's original deed. Second, whether the headmaster appointment process is consistent with the deed's requirements. Third, whether any structural modifications to the deed have been made without proper authorization." He opened the briefing document. "I'd like to take them in order." What followed was 2 hours of the most concentrated, sustained legal and institutional dissection that the Hogwarts meeting chamber had probably seen since the 17th century. Blackwood handled the formal presentation. Harry handled the questions, which came fast and varied and which he answered with the specificity of someone who had been reading nothing but this material for the past month and the clarity of someone who had been reading this kind of material for 4 years. The Founder's Deed issue was, legally, the clearest. The original document, Ragnarok had a certified Gringotts copy, which carried the ancient magical authentication that made it unimpeachable, specified governance structures that had been progressively modified over 200 years through a series of board resolutions that, on individual examination, each looked reasonable, but in aggregate had shifted power steadily and consistently from the hereditary seats toward the appointed ones. The appointed members were, by a long tradition, appointed by the current headmaster. The headmaster's appointments shaped the board. The board confirmed the headmaster. The circularity was not accidental. And the person who had, over 40 years, most thoroughly exploited this circular structure was sitting at the other end of the table looking warm and interested. Governor Marchmont, who was in her 60s and had the look of someone who had suspected something was wrong for a long time and had been waiting for the paperwork, said, "Are you saying the current governance structure is unlawful?" "I'm saying it's non-compliant with the founding document," Harry said. "Which has the same practical consequence, but is technically a different claim." "What would compliance look like?" asked Governor Aldridge. "Hereditary seats restore their original voting weight. Appointed seats are made through a process that doesn't involve the headmaster. The headmaster appointment process is reviewed by the full board under deed-specified criteria rather than the current informal consensus model." Harry paused. None of this requires removing the current headmaster. It requires reforming the structure around the position so that whoever holds it is properly accountable. Dumbledore spoke then, measured and thoughtful, making the case for institutional stability and the value of experience and the risk of disrupting systems that worked. He was persuasive. He was always persuasive. Several board members who had been nodding along with Harry's presentation settled back slightly, the way people settle when someone they trust tells them it's all right. Harry listened to the whole speech. Then he said, "The current structure works well for the headmaster. That's not the same as working well for the school." He said it quietly. No heat. Just a fact, set on the table. The vote on whether to initiate a formal compliance review was 18 to 5 in favor. Dumbledore voted against. His expression, throughout, remained entirely serene. Something changed after the board meeting. Not immediately, not dramatically, but in the specific way that institutional shifts happen, through a dozen small recalibrations in the behavior of people who were paying attention. Professors who had been professionally cordial became professionally interested. 3 board governors who hadn't replied to Blackwood's previous letters wrote within the week. Amelia Bones sent a note to Harry, "Good work. The Wisengamot is watching." And Augusta Longbottom arrived for a weekend visit walking 3 inches taller than usual, which was significant because her usual posture already suggested she was prepared to carry the sky. There was also the question of Quirrell. Harry had noticed him in the first week, the defense against the dark arts professor with the stammer and the purple turban and the eyes that moved in a slightly wrong pattern, like someone else was sometimes looking out of them. He'd added it to the list of things he was watching and not pushing, and he'd mentioned it to Neville and Hermione in the oblique way that was their shorthand for pay attention to this but don't act yet. Hermione had noticed the smell first. Something underneath the garlic that layered the turban, something that her excellent nose had identified as, not quite decay, but the presence of something that existed beyond the normal boundaries of a living person's chemistry. Neville had noticed the way the defense classroom's plants wilted. He'd brought it up hesitantly, half expecting to be told he was imagining it, and Harry had said, "What plants, exactly?" and taken notes with the focused attention that meant he was taking it seriously. It was building toward something. Harry could feel the shape of it without being able to see the whole of it yet, which was the kind of situation he disliked, not because it made him anxious, but because incomplete information was a strategic disadvantage, and he didn't like disadvantages. The shape got clearer in December, 3 weeks before the Christmas break, on a night when Harry was in the library after hours with a specific pass from McGonagall. He'd had standing late library access since week 2, after McGonagall had silently acknowledged that the normal curfew rules were slightly absurd when applied to someone whose evening reading was running parallel to her 7th-year students, and he heard something. Not voices. Movement. The specific sound of someone moving through the corridor outside the library with the self-conscious quiet of someone who doesn't want to be heard, which is a different sound from someone simply walking quietly. He gathered his things without hurry and moved to the library door and looked out, and what he saw was Professor Quirrell, turban-clad and moving fast toward the 3rd-floor corridor with a look on his face that was not the look of a man taking a nighttime walk. Harry followed. The 3rd-floor corridor had the door, which every first year had been told very firmly was forbidden. The door was standing slightly open. Quirrell was through it. Harry looked at the door for a moment. He thought about what was behind it, he'd done his research, had a reasonable working hypothesis about what the school was protecting, and had formed clear opinions about the wisdom of storing it in an educational institution. He also thought about what following Quirrell in an unprepared late-night encounter actually offered him versus what it cost, and arrived at the same conclusion in about 3 seconds that a careful general would arrive at in 3 hours. He turned around, walked to McGonagall's office, knocked, and when she opened it in her dressing gown with a look that suggested this had better be important, he said, "I think there's something wrong with Quirrell and I think it has to do with whatever you're protecting on the 3rd floor. I don't have complete information yet, but I wanted you to know what I observed before I did anything about it." McGonagall stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Come in," in a voice that had gone very carefully neutral. He came in and told her what he'd seen, what Hermione had smelled, what Neville had noticed about the plants, and the pattern of Quirrell's eye movements that suggested, to Harry, the presence of something that was sharing the professor's physical space. He laid it out in the same flat, factual way he laid everything out, and he watched McGonagall's face go through several things and land on something that was not quite alarm but was alert in a way that spoke to her own previous concerns. She said, "I'll speak to the headmaster." "I know," Harry said. "I wanted you to have the information regardless." She looked at him. "Regardless of what?" "Regardless of what the headmaster decides to do with it," Harry said. And before she could respond to that, "Good night, Professor." He walked back to Gryffindor Tower through the dark corridors, and the castle breathed around him, ancient and enormous and full of its own accumulated weight, and he thought about incomplete information and the problem with situations that had moving parts you couldn't fully see. He was going to need to be ready for whatever was underneath that turban before the year was out. The question was how. The answer, as it often did, came from an unexpected direction. It came from Snape. Not as a gift. Not willingly. It came in the form of an overheard conversation that Harry was not supposed to hear and that Snape would, if asked, completely deny having allowed him to overhear, but which Harry was approximately 60% certain had been deliberate. He was in the charms corridor on the way back from Flitwick's office. He'd stayed late to discuss the runic amplification theory he'd been working on, which Flitwick found genuinely exciting and slightly overwhelming, when he heard voices from the side passage near the staircases. Snape's angular voice, pitched low, and Quirrell's stammer, though the stammer was less present than usual. "Don't know why you're protecting it," Snape was saying. "It won't save you. Whatever you've been promised, whatever he's told you," Quirrell said something Harry couldn't fully catch. Something about there being no choice. "There is always a choice," Snape said, with the cold certainty of a man who knew something about having made terrible ones. "The difference is the cost." A pause. "I'm watching you, Quirrell. Every move you make in this school." Footsteps. Harry stepped back into a doorway and Snape swept past without acknowledging him, which was either a masterpiece of professional composure or confirmation that the moment had been constructed, and Harry stood in the doorway for a long moment thinking about Severus Snape, who was not what he appeared to be and who was, apparently, also watching Quirrell, and who had just, accidentally or not, told Harry where the surveillance was pointed. He filed it. He moved on. The weeks moved toward Christmas with the compressed velocity of a busy school term, and the political temperature of the castle moved with them. The board governance review had reverberated, as these things do, outward through the school community. There were rumors, the way there are always rumors, and the rumors had the particular texture of things that are substantially true but insufficiently detailed. Harry had a letter from Sirius every 3 days and a letter from Ragnarok every week, and the ongoing reclamation process continued its steady march, 61 lordships now, 28 to go, the Wisengamot seats accumulating with the slow, unstoppable quality of a tide. What Dumbledore did in those weeks was interesting. He did not confront Harry directly. That wasn't his method. What he did was gentler and considerably more sophisticated, a series of small, seemingly unconnected interventions, all of them warm, all of them reasonable, that collectively worked to create a specific narrative in the school. Harry Potter, brilliant and driven, carrying the weight of something too large for someone his age. Not villainous, not misguided, simply in need of guidance. The right kind of guidance. The kind that only wisdom and experience could provide. It was, Harry thought, genuinely impressive. He recognized it the way you recognize a move in chess from a player who's a decade better than you, not because you'd have found it yourself, but because once you see it, its elegance is self-evident. He also recognized that the counter wasn't to argue with the narrative but to render it irrelevant through actions that couldn't be reframed. Which was why, when the first openly hostile thing happened, Harry had been ready for it for 2 weeks. It was a Friday evening, the last Friday before Christmas break, and the Great Hall was loud with end-of-term energy, people finishing their last essays, celebrating the end of classes, the specific warm chaos of a school about to release into holidays. Harry was at the Gryffindor table with Neville and Hermione and the twins, working through a letter from Blackwood, when the doors opened. The man who came in was not a student and not a professor. He was ministry, in formal robes, with the specific stiff bearing of someone on official business, and behind him were 2 people Harry recognized, Governor Montague, who was one of Dumbledore's 5 board votes, and a woman Harry didn't know but whose robes had the crest of the Department of Magical Records. They walked to the staff table. Dumbledore rose to meet them with the warm welcome of a host. The Great Hall's noise dropped a notch as people noticed. McGonagall, reading the body language with the speed of long experience, caught Harry's eye across the room. Her face was carefully neutral but her eyes were not. The ministry official produced a document, which Dumbledore read with an expression that transitioned smoothly from welcome to concern to measured authority. Then Dumbledore looked across the hall to where Harry was sitting, and the hall went fully quiet in the way it goes quiet when the famous person everyone's been watching becomes the center of a visible moment. The ministry official spoke. His voice carried. Lord Potter Peverell. I have a formal notice here from the Department of Magical Records regarding the outstanding lordship reclamations. He paused. Several of the claims are being disputed on the grounds of insufficient lineage documentation. The department requires a formal hearing before any further reclamations are processed. Harry set down Blackwood's letter. Across the table, Fred caught his eye with a look that said, "This is the move." Harry stood up. The whole hall watched him stand, this 11-year-old boy in Gryffindor robes, and he looked at the ministry official with the same composure he brought to everything, and he said, clearly enough for the hall to hear, what specific lineages are being disputed. The official consulted his document. He read out 4 names. 3 of them were minor lines with complex transfer histories. One of them was the Peverell line, one of the oldest and most thoroughly documented magical bloodlines in Britain, with a Gringotts blood certification that was by any measure unimpeachable. The Peverell line, Harry said, was certified by Gringotts blood inheritance rite 4 years ago. That certification carries ancient magical authentication that predates the Department of Magical Records by 9 centuries. He paused. On what legal basis is the department disputing a Gringotts certification? The official looked at his document. He looked at it for rather longer than the answer should have required. The department has the authority to review, under what statute? Harry said. The department's founding charter grants, which section? Harry said. The official was quiet. I'm asking, Harry said, pleasantly, because I've read the department's founding charter, and I'm not aware of a section that grants review authority over Gringotts ancient blood certifications. If such a section exists, I'd like the specific reference, because it would represent a genuine conflict between wizarding law and goblin treaty obligations that the Wisengamot would need to resolve. He looked at the official. And if it doesn't exist, then this dispute has no legal foundation, and I'd like to know who in the department authorized the filing. The Great Hall was completely silent. The enchanted ceiling above showed a clear December night, stars sharp and cold, and in that silence the ministry official looked at the document in his hands as though hoping it might offer him a different answer than the one it contained. Governor Montague said, from beside the official, Lord Potter, I think the intent here is simply to ensure proper procedure, said Augusta Longbottom, who had, Harry now noticed, been sitting in the gallery seats reserved for visiting board members, would be to file a formal dispute through Blackwood's office, with proper notice and supporting documentation, not to deliver a notice in the Great Hall of Hogwarts on the last Friday before Christmas. She stood. I'd also note that the timing of this filing is interesting, given that the board governance review concluded 3 weeks ago. Montague's jaw tightened. Lady Longbottom, the timing is simply convenient, Augusta said, with a precision that made the word do the work of a full paragraph. Harry looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked back at him, and the warmth was all present, all genuine, and entirely unruffled, and Harry thought, he expected to rattle me. He thought, he expected this to look like an attack and have me respond to the attack. He thought, the correct response isn't to fight the notice. It's to do what I'm doing right now. I'll have Blackwood respond to the department formally on Monday, Harry said. I'd appreciate receiving the dispute in writing through official channels, as Augusta says. For tonight, he looked at the official, is there anything that requires immediate action? No, the official said. He was folding the document back with the quiet deflation of a man who has realized his errand has gone differently than planned. No, the formal response through Blackwood's office would be appropriate. Good, Harry said. Merry Christmas. And he sat down. The Great Hall exhaled. The noise came back in pieces, and then all at once, and Harry picked up Blackwood's letter and continued reading it, and Hermione, who had watched the entire thing with an expression of focused intensity, said quietly, the Peverell dispute was a test. Yes, Harry said. They wanted to see how you'd react publicly. Yes. You turned it into a legal question before anyone could make it a political one. The legal question is better ground for us, Harry said. On political ground, he has decades of relationship capital. On legal ground, we have documentation. He turned a page of Blackwood's letter. Besides, this hall has 300 students who just watched a ministry official fail to answer a basic question about his own department's authority. That's more useful than anything I could have said. Neville, who had been watching the staff table, said quietly, Dumbledore's not angry. No, Harry said. He's smiling. I know. Isn't that bad? Harry looked up from the letter and across the hall to the staff table, where Dumbledore was speaking to the ministry official with the gracious calm of a man who had adjusted his plans and found the adjustment acceptable. It means he's recalibrating rather than retreating, Harry said. Which means the next move will be better than this one. Brilliant, Neville said flatly. He's very good, Harry said. We just have to be better. He looked at the letter again. Which is why I need you to read this brief from Blackwood tonight and tell me if the legal theory in Section 4 holds up. You spotted the gap in the equal magic clause argument last time. Neville looked at him. I'm going to spend Christmas reading legal briefs. Yes, Harry said. Right, Neville said, and held out his hand for the letter. The trouble, when it came, was not what Harry had been watching for. It was Quirrell. It was the last day of term, 2 hours before the Hogwarts Express, and the castle was in the beautiful organized chaos of departure, trunks being levitated down staircases, owls being convinced into their carriers, last-minute Christmas card exchanges in the corridors. Harry was helping Neville with a particularly obstinate trunk clasp when Hermione appeared at the dormitory door with an expression that had bypassed alarm and gone straight to focused. The third-floor corridor, she said. The door's open. I could hear something from the staircase. Harry set down the trunk clasp. What kind of something? Something that didn't sound like a professor, she said. He looked at her. He looked at Neville. Then he picked up his wand and moved. The third-floor corridor was empty when they arrived, but Hermione was right, the door was open and from beyond it came sounds that had nothing to do with the large three-headed dog that was ostensibly the first layer of protection, because the sounds were too far away, too deep in the sequence of protections. Something was moving through the layers, and doing it with the specific signature of someone who knew what they were and had prepared for them. Harry looked at the open door. He looked at Hermione and Neville. How much do you know about what's in there? He asked. Some, Hermione said. A powerful object. Multiple magical protections. 7, Harry said. I've been working through what they're likely to be since October. He looked at the door again. Quirrell's in there. I don't know how far through. I don't know what he's doing when he gets to the end. We could get a professor, Neville said. McGonagall is overseeing the departure from the main courtyard, Harry said. By the time we find her and get back, Quirrell could be through. He looked at the door. Then he looked at his friends. I'm not asking either of you to come. Hermione said, shut up, and walked through the door. Neville said, I agree with Hermione, and followed her. Harry went through last, and the door swung closed behind them, and the sound of the departure chaos cut off, and ahead was the corridor that led to whatever was at the center of the protections, and Harry moved toward it with his wand out and his mind already running through what he knew about each layer and what getting through them would require. The dog was sleeping. The music Hagrid used was still faint in the air, someone had already played it, and recently. Harry moved them past quickly, Neville's hand steady at his shoulder, Hermione's breathing controlled and deliberate. The room beyond was a drop into a plant, Devil's Snare. He recognized it immediately from Neville's description of the smell and the reaching, responsive quality of the vines. He understood the mechanics before the vines reached them, and he said, don't fight it. Relax, completely, it needs your panic to hold, and he felt Hermione do it beside him and then Neville, with the particular ease of someone who had been working with plants his whole life and understood that struggle was the wrong language. They dropped through. Room to room after that, each one different, each one requiring something specific, a flying key that Harry caught on the first pass through sheer spatial instinct, a chess game that he and Hermione solved together in 4 minutes, a logic puzzle on a table of potions that Hermione worked through with the intensity of someone who has been waiting to apply logic in a life-or-death situation. He didn't let her think too long. "Far left," he said, when she was halfway through her reasoning. She looked at him. "How, the smell? It's the only one that smells like fire resistance, which is what we need to go forward." He picked it up and drank half, handed the rest to her. Neville takes the other one back with him. "I'm going back," Neville said. "You're going for McGonagall," Harry said. "We're going forward." "If we don't come back, you're coming back," Neville said. "Yes," Harry said. "But if we don't, you need to tell her everything, and tell Ragnarok, and the legal process continues regardless." "All right." Neville looked at him for a long moment, round-faced and clear-eyed and not afraid, the way he was getting better and better at not being afraid, and said, "All right." He took the bottle. "Be quick." Harry and Hermione went through the last door. What was beyond it was not what Harry had expected, which was a problem with hypotheses. He'd expected to find Quirrell. He'd expected to find whatever the object was, he had his theories. He'd expected a confrontation that would be physically dangerous and magically demanding. He hadn't expected the mirror. It stood in the center of the last chamber, taller than a man, gilded frame glowing in the torchlight, the inscription running around its edge, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit anwosi. And in front of it, Quirrell, but Quirrell unraveling, the turban coming away, Quirrell's body moving in the specific wrong way of a puppet with 2 puppeteers, and from the back of his head something looking out. Harry looked at it. A face. Pale and sunken and wrong in the way that faces are wrong when they no longer inhabit a full body, and the eyes were red and lit with an intelligence that was cold and deep and very old. "Harry Potter," the face said, from the back of Quirrell's head. The voice was like something that used to be a voice. "I wondered when you'd find your way here." "Lord Voldemort," Harry said. Because naming things accurately was important, and because refusing to use the name was a gift to the name that he wasn't interested in giving. The red eyes regarded him. "You're not afraid. You're a parasite living on the back of someone else's skull," Harry said. "You're powerful and you're dangerous, but you're not in a position to negotiate from strength." He looked at the mirror. "And you're stuck." Silence. "The mirror shows the deepest desire of whoever stands before it," Harry said. "Its protection is perfect for that reason, only someone who wants to find the object but not use it can retrieve it. You've been standing here and you can't get through." He looked at the face on the back of Quirrell's head. "How long?" The red eyes narrowed. "You're clever." "I'm informed," Harry said. "There's a difference." Hermione, beside him, had her wand raised. Harry's was at his side. He was thinking, fast and clean, about what was possible here and what wasn't. "Here is what I know," Harry said, addressing not just Voldemort but the situation itself, which was what mattered. "You're incorporeal. You're here because Dumbledore put what you're looking for here, without, I think, fully considering the implications of a possessed professor having access to a school for 9 months. That's going to be a conversation I'll be having with the board." He paused. "But right now, you're stuck, and I'm not going to let you out." Quirrell's arms came up. The ropes shot out with a speed that Harry had been waiting for, because standing and talking only lasted until the person talking decided it wasn't working, and he moved, not dramatically, not with visible effort, just stepped to the side in the way someone steps around furniture they know is there, and the ropes passed through the space where he'd been standing, and he said to Hermione, "Go back for Neville," and hit Quirrell with a body bind that drove him sideways and kept driving him backward until he hit the chamber wall, and kept him there. The face on the back of the skull screamed. It was not a pleasant sound. Quirrell struggled against the bind with a strength that was not his own, Voldemort's while driving a body that was half gone anyway, burning it up, and Harry could see the damage of it in the way Quirrell's hands were already blistering where he'd touched Harry's arm during the term, except Harry hadn't understood why until right now. Contact. Contact hurt Voldemort through whatever this protective magic was. His mother's sacrifice. He'd read about it. He understood the theory. He walked toward Quirrell. "You're going to touch me," the face said. "Knowing what it will do?" "Knowing what it will do to you," Harry said. "Yes." He grabbed Quirrell's wrists. The reaction was immediate and total. Quirrell screamed and the face screamed and the chamber filled with light, and Harry felt heat that was not fire and cold that was not cold and something in the air that was like magic tearing its own seams, and he held on, because the thing that he had understood about this moment and that he thought Dumbledore in all his careful, protective maneuvering had not fully appreciated was that love was not merely a passive defense. It was also a weapon. When it was over, Quirrell was on the floor and the face was gone, fled, dissipated, pushed back to whatever non-existence sustained it between bodies, and Harry was standing in the center of the chamber with his hands aching and the mirror glowing quietly behind him, and Hermione was in the doorway with Neville and McGonagall's face was doing something that Arabella Figg would have recognized, the face of someone who has been watching from a distance and has just witnessed the distance collapse. McGonagall crossed the chamber in 6 steps and crouched in front of Harry with her hands on his shoulders, looking at his face with an urgency that was not professional at all. "Are you hurt?" she said. "My hands," he said. "But I'm fine." She looked at his hands. She looked at his face. Then she said, in a voice that was absolutely not going to do anything undignified like crack, "I am going to say something to you and I need you to take it seriously." "All right," Harry said. "You should have come to me," she said. "Before this." Harry looked at her for a moment. "I came to you 2 weeks ago about Quirrell." McGonagall went still. "You said you'd speak to the headmaster," Harry said. She stood up slowly. She looked at the chamber. She looked at the unconscious Quirrell, the absent protection, the mirror still standing serenely in the center of it all. She looked at Harry, who was watching her with clear, calm, unaccusing eyes. She said, with the precise quietness of a woman who was very, very angry and was choosing her targets carefully, "I'll be writing a report." "I know," Harry said. "I'd like a copy." He picked up his wand from where it had fallen. He looked at the mirror once, just once, and what looked back at him was not what he expected. Not wealth, not power, not his parents. Himself. Standing in a rebuilt world. Surrounded by people who were there because they wanted to be. He turned away from it and walked back to the door.